just here in the room, and for those of you online, there are representatives from all over the world. So welcome to everyone from wherever you are from. Now, the objective of the Economic Forum is to present to you the outcomes and recommendations from a series of multi-stakeholder expert panel discussions that are meant to examine the clinical practice gaps around implementing precision medicine from an economic and operational perspective. Now, the focus of our multi-stakeholder expert panel discussions was to shine a spotlight on the gaps holding back precision medicine. In this regard, our intent is to focus on the publication on practice gaps that was published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology and Precision Oncology by Diaceutics, and led by Diaceutics and the Personalized Medicine Coalition. And just as a little background, that paper had shown using the diagnostics therapeutics database that Diaceutics has, that only about 36% of non-small cell, newly diagnosed non-small cell lung cancer patients actually make it all the way through the precision oncology pathway to receive the optimal treatment for their particular cancer. 64% of patients are being lost at various points along the precision oncology pathway, whether at biospecimen collection, biomarker test ordering, biomarker test result delivery, or the interpretation of those results to prescribe targeted treatment. 36% of patients is unacceptable. And Diaceutics has put together this forum, this panel, to discuss ways to better deliver personalized medicine. So today we'll talk about these operational and economic impediments which often frustrate the delivery of precision oncology. Now, Denny Van Liew, who's sitting next to me along with Susanne Munksted, co-chair this panel and this program. And Denny will talk shortly about the who, what, and where, and how the expert forum panel members conducted our analysis and came up with our recommendations. But let me say here that our goal really was to put together real-world, cutting-edge solutions to some of the challenges that are truly impeding the delivery of personalized medicine in oncology care. Our expert forum panel that helped develop these recommendations really does represent a cross-section of different stakeholders involved in the precision oncology space. And we have the pharmaceutical and diagnostic industries, we have clinical providers, patient groups, payers, and economists that can really get to some of the issues that are frustrating the personalized medicine approach. Our goal of hosting this open summit today and inviting all of you to participate really is to get your feedback as well, to make this a community approach to developing these recommendations. So while we will talk about the recommendations, they are draft recommendations, and we will look to get your feedback through a series of engagement opportunities to better develop and to finalize these recommendations for a report which we hope the community can use to better address personalized medicine. We hope to do this in 5 steps. The first, Denny will walk us through how we conducted the forum, the expert forum discussions. Susanne will then lead us on a discussion with the representative forum panel, both those in the room and then some of us virtually, to give greater context to the program. Via the online chat function, Q&A, and you will have an opportunity online to ask questions and to respond to a number of questions that Denny will pose through a voting session. We will gather your feedback to further inform this body of work. Then, the 4th step, we will discuss the readiness of implementation of some of these strategies, and Peter Keeling will have a fireside discussion with 2 well-known and well-respected thought leaders in the precision medicine space, Dr. Howard McLeod and Kristen Pothier. And they will talk about the value of the precision medicine approach and how best to improve implementation. Finally, Denny and Susanne will conclude the work, the forum today, draw conclusions from the conversation and present a pathway forward for how to move forward and to use this. These discussions and all of the work that we do today will then be incorporated into a white paper, which we hope will be community-driven and will help inform further advance of precision oncology. Now, a couple of things from a logistics standpoint. First of all, you online are right now in our virtual conference center that Diaceutics, it's part of Diaceutics Precision Medicine, the Diagnostics Therapeutic Precision Medicine platform. You're in the conference section, and this conference will remain open. Diaceutics will keep this conference open for 90 days, where you can continue to come back to take a look at the recording and other components of this conversation, and we encourage you to invite your colleagues so that you can partake in all that we discuss here today to help drive your efforts forward. In particular, I want to bring up the library of materials that are also part of this virtual conference center, where we've gathered a library of the most important papers, data sets, posters, and other materials to help inform all that you do. Now, finally, what we really hope to accomplish here is that really all of us, even in this room, that have been part of this panel discussion, and for all of those of you online, we may learn a little bit about how to better implement personalized medicine. So we want you to take these learnings forward and use them in all of your efforts and your approaches to better deliver personalized medicine. I think we all come here with that in mind and that goal. How can we do this better? The 36% of patients in lung cancer, a type of cancer where there's a well-known and well-established personalized medicine pathway, 64% of patients not getting personalized medicine is not tenable. We need to do better. So hopefully we learn something on how to do this better, and we take what we know now as the practice gaps, and we transform those practice gaps from an economic standpoint into opportunities to better develop strategies to deliver precision oncology. I want to thank the Diaceutics team, especially Peter Keeling and Susanne Munksted, and especially Danielle Baker, who really was responsible for putting this program together. Thank you, Diaceutics, for bringing this group together, for leading us over the course of this program over the last year to drive these solutions and recommendations forward. I also want to thank Denny Van Liew for leading this group and leading this conversation today. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today in this discussion, for your continued interest in precision medicine, and in helping us to devise this program, these recommendations, so that we can move forward with an improved approach to the delivery of precision oncology. So with that, I'll turn it over to Denny to lead the rest of the conversation, to talk a little bit about our panel discussions, our expert panel discussions, and to lead us through the rest of the conversation. Thank you, Denny.
Thank you, Daryl. So thank you, Daryl, for the overview, and thank you for acknowledging all the hard work. I just echo that. The Diaceutics team has been absolutely wonderful to work with, and I'm very grateful for what I've learned from that team, as well as from the panel members that you'll meet later today. I also want to express my warm welcome to those here in Belfast. The last time I was in this fair city was 25 years ago. It's changed. If you haven't come to Belfast, just a shout out to Belfast. It's really a remarkable place. And right now, this time of year, it's absolutely beautiful. As Daryl mentioned, and I'll just say this again, the panel represented a broad forum of stakeholders, but you in the audience also are a broad forum of stakeholders. We have people from biopharma, diagnostics, testing, payers, patient representative advocates, policymakers, and academics, and we have a few students. And to the students dialed in today, you really have a chance to make a difference for the positive. If only 36% of patients for non-small cell lung cancer get treated, that means 64% don't. And we're using non-small cell lung cancer as the use case for this. We would argue that this is probably true in other diagnostic areas, not just NSC, LC. As Daryl mentioned, our overarching goal was to provide a real-world and up-to-date view of the practice gap issues that are faced with precision diagnostic testing and precision medicine. And we did this through a debate process that I'll take you through very briefly. It will help you understand the next section when we get into the meat of our draft recommendations with key experts in the field. In some cases, they agree with each other. In other cases, they disagreed. We refined our hypotheses. We improved upon those hypotheses. And what you see today is where we've gotten to after about a year's worth of work. So how did we do all this? All in all, we only had 10 hours of active forum discussion and probably another 14 hours of time outside of that besides the review and independent study people did. So I put that out there for you because we would love to see you take this back to your own communities, the geographies you're in, and actually put this into practice with local circumstances that you have to deal with. So how did we do it? I'm a process guy. I've been a process guy my entire career in healthcare, so I will take you through the process, and it's pretty straightforward. First off, we collated, we curated, and we worked through an evidence base that was initially provided by Diaceutics, but then it was contributed to by everybody that participated in this process. And that evidence base, as Daryl mentioned, is available to you as of today and for the next 90 days. So I'd really encourage you to look into that evidence base because it is up to date and it is the current thinking that we could find about precision gaps. We also looked at those papers from various lenses, and I will show you a slide in just a minute. Not to go through the slide; it's in the virtual database, but just to show you how we thought about it, to identify what are the levers that could impact this, and what are the interdependencies. All of you have a chance to look at this virtual library. If we missed a paper or you think there's a paper that we should add, please forward it to us afterwards. We'd love to get you to participate in this as much as you'd like to participate. After we built the evidence database, we did an analysis of these papers. And I would just like to have Danielle bring up a slide because this is in the database to show you how we thought about this. We just did a mind map on this, and we broke all those papers, those 400 different pieces of information in there, into 3 big branches with certain themes in each of those branches, which is on this slide. And then we tested those out in something we call edge hypothesis. And we used this to develop these edge scenarios, which in essence are hypotheses. We're all in the science business. We're a hypothesis-driven business, so we had hypotheses. But these hypotheses were provocative. They wanted to really push the envelope, not just to incrementally change things, but to really push the envelope to what is possible if only we could change the system. We took a look at these potential solutions in a group and also individually to explore their feasibility of a given solution working in the real world. We debated it both in these forums that I mentioned, but also online with each other, and then we refined them based on this debate. The varied perspectives of each of the panel members helped us come to a holistic approach on these, and then we actually narrowed it down even further, which you'll see today, into some big themes that we think are addressable. In our 4th and final workshop, we looked at all this information holistically, at what we discussed in the previous 3 forums, in order to prioritize and simplify as needed. We did record each of those forums. We took that recording and we parsed through it. We provided that back to the forum members. So we have gone through a lot of information. We tried to make it as synthesized and simple as possible, but this is very much driven by both evidence but also the expert views of the panel members. So what's the key benefit to all this? What's the key benefit? Why is this a good way to work? First of all, it is a very efficient way to work for very busy people. And I presume, like you, you're all as busy as we are. So it's a good way to develop a collective view which will show you a potential solution to closing a practice gap. We firmly believe that the view that we're going to discuss in the next section is both actionable and realistic, but at the same time, it is thought-provoking. It will take change, and those of you that are leaders and those of you that are just getting started in your careers are part of that change. Before we started today, one of my colleagues mentioned that we need change management, and this is not a forum about change management, but as you take a look at these actions, if you come to agree with them, you need to think about what are the change agents that you need to work with in order to make these actions come into reality. I'll just say one last time, because I know there's a lot of information here, and when we first looked at the evidence papers that we collected, it was mind-numbing. And I will tell you, when I first got involved with this project about a year ago, it took me about 3 days to read through those papers. And when I say read through them, I actually had my thumb on every page, or my finger. I can't say that I read every word, but how do you take these recommendations and make them actionable? They're in the database for you to take a look at. This virtual library, to me, is a very rich resource. And we're going to start talking about what our conclusions are in the next section. So it's my pleasure to hand the meeting over to my co-chair, Susanne, to go through these recommendations with her panel at a high level and to lead a discussion about each of those. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Denny. So we have panel members on site here, and we have panel members virtually as well. So again, a good representation of how the world is today. Before we get into the discussions and share some of the recommendations and some of the discussions that we've had, I want to just introduce the panel, and I will kick off by introducing myself. So I'm the Chief Precision Medicine Officer at Diaceutics. I come with a background from the pharmaceutical, the diagnostic industry before I joined Diaceutics. I have probably worked in the space of precision medicine for the last 15 years or so. But when a long time ago, when I did my master's in pharmaceutical sciences, I've reflected on this afterwards. I can't recall that there was any teaching on precision medicine, any education on biomarker-driven therapy. So that have kind of like puzzled me a little bit after going into this space, that we certainly need that aspect as well. I'll go round the panel, and Sarah, if you want to start.
Sure. Sarah Hersey, thank you for joining us today. I lead our precision medicine organization at Bristol Myers Squibb, and just delighted to be here with everyone today.
Mark?
Thanks, Susanne. Mark Lawler. I'm Professor of Digital Health and Chair in Translational Cancer Genomics at Queen's University here in Belfast. I'm also Chair of the Lancet Oncology European Ground Shock Commission, which is the most comprehensive analysis of cancer research in Europe, and which has led us to reimagine how we actually should deliver cancer research and cancer innovation. I'm also, which is pertinent to the conversation here, the co-chair of the Lancet Oncology, Precision Oncology and Omics Commission, which we were working on at the moment and we hope to bring out next year.
Daryl?
Thank you, Susanne. Thanks, everybody. So I didn't introduce myself while I was welcoming everybody, so I saved it for now. I'm Daryl Pritchard, the Senior Vice President of Science Policy at the Personalized Medicine Coalition, the PMC. So PMC worked with Diaceutics to publish the Practice Gaps paper. We're a education, advocacy, and evidence development organization based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S., where we're really focused on driving forward a personalized medicine approach. We have members from all different types of organizations, all different stakeholder groups, many of which are on the online presentation and are in the room. And we all come together with the shared mission to advance personalized medicine. And one of our key focuses now is to understand how better to implement precision medicine. We understand that the case for personalized medicine in many ways has been made. We know in some ways that this is a more valuable approach to addressing cancers. And now we need to figure out how to implement it. And hopefully we'll have that discussion today and throughout the rest of today and moving forward.
Thanks, Daryl. Dawn?
Hi, Dawn Cardero. I'm the Director of Precision Medicine at Point 32 Health, which is the parent company of two leading regional health plans in the New England market. And my background is as a genetic counselor, so I have worn that provider hat. I've also had the pleasure to work in patient advocacy, including improving access to genetic testing for newborns, so I've worn that hat. And then I spent about 15 years in the molecular diagnostics industry, some of which was spent calling on health plans. And now that I'm with a health plan, I am leading our clinical initiatives and demonstration pilots related to precision medicine testing. And I've had many ahas about what the pain points are for a health plan when it comes to precision medicine, and I look forward to sharing that.
Thanks, Dawn. I'll turn to the virtual panel. Brenda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Brenda Janek, and I'm an industry veteran of 25 years across Merck, Pfizer, actually twice at Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb, as well as Big Tech and the CRO, in everything from leading and developing translational IT teams at Merck to Pfizer's Biobank to running large clinical operational teams at BMS. I now own a company called Clinical Transformation Partners at the request actually of a big pharma company who is requesting and has requested help in innovating the precision medicine operations space. So I brought all of these various domain experiences together to really accelerate science through developing precision medicine operations. And so thank you so much for allowing me to join today in this conversation.
Thanks, Brenda. Cecilia, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me?
We hear you well.
Great. So, Cecilia Schott, on my second week at GSK as leading the precision medicine portfolio planning, I've started to work on this amazing group when I was at Novartis. So I just want to acknowledge that transition. But I think the mission of advancing, delivering, the best test to inform patient treatment, monitoring, and also the diagnosis, it goes across and it doesn't have any barriers, as you're going to see when we're working together in this group. I mean, there's barriers for implementation, but not when we are pulling all together. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to this really great discussion and output. And thanks, Susanne.
Thank you. Dr. Chandra?
Hello, everyone. I'm Pranil Chandra, Senior Vice President and Chief Genomics Officer at Path Group. I'm a molecular pathologist, have been in practice for over 15 years. And at Path Group, I oversee all of our molecular testing in a high volume, high throughput practice. Path Group is based in Nashville, Tennessee. And today, we are one of the top 5 diagnostics players in the country, and we operate in about 25 different states and provide the full range of anatomic, clinical, and molecular pathology services to 15,000 physicians and also professional pathology services at over 200 hospitals. We've been implementing precision diagnostics since 2012, and we were one of the earliest providers of these testing services in community practice, which is where most cancer patients are. And we are also very fully aware of the challenges as well as opportunities behind precision medicine, which have been very nicely articulated in the paper that was talked about earlier. So it's my pleasure to be here. I am very excited to be part of the forum and to engage with you all today.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. And Kamala, are you online as well?
Yes, please. Thank you. First of all, it's an honor to be on the forum and to be representing the forum. Thank you very much. This is my 20th year as an innovator in precision medicine. I can't believe how 20 years has gone by since the industry has seen with the Merck publicly announced Vioxx scenario. I think we started hearing more and more about precision medicine with all the greatest learning failures. I come across, like many of you, from the industry, starting with Merck, then entering the world of companion diagnostics. New terms come, and really, I think we are at really, amazing transformative time. Been at Quintiles, Quest Diagnostics, several other boutique labs, but then with taking those insights in the pain points of adoption of a test, I cannot believe we are still talking about how only 36% of non-small cell lung cancer patients get tested. We are at fascinating times to bring data-driven insights. My most recent role at Concert AI was an amazing deep dive in understanding the gaps of testing from a multimodal perspective and multifactorial perspective. Currently, just like Brenda, I own my own company whenever I don't take full-time roles. The president of Health Collaborations, and currently I'm advising few AI companies who are working on data-driven insights and data-driven modalities in either designing a diagnostic test or a therapeutic test, and also bringing data-driven insights in interpreting testing gaps, equity, and also access to any sort of therapeutic innovations. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Kamala. And you will see on the panel list also that we have Terry Conran on there. Unfortunately, Terry had a last-minute urgency and is not able to join us today. Terry is the founder of KRAS Kickers and was representing the patient voice in our discussion, the patient advocacy voice. It's very passionate and brought a lot of value to the discussion. So unfortunately, she'll not be here, but we'll try our best to convey some of her viewpoints throughout the panel discussion. So before we get into the actual discussion about the insights we found during the panel discussions and the recommendations, just want to put a little bit of context around it. We actually initially started out with calling this the Economic Forum, with the purpose of trying to understand, on the background of the practice gap study, what are some of the economic barriers that we are seeing, and how, from an economic perspective, can we move this forward and close the gaps. It became evident relatively early in the discussion that we very quickly went into discussing the operational aspects, policy aspects, guideline aspects, which is why we expanded the scope of the discussion. And you can imagine that with such a topic you can go in many different directions, so found it needed to just shape the discussion a little bit and put some frames around it to structure us in the topic. So just going around some of the key context that we set up. Sarah, if you want to kick us off by talking about, we chose non-small cell lung cancer as the disease to circle our discussions around. If you want to put a few words to why.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I thought about in coming here was that it was so striking to me how long we've actually been in the precision medicine space, especially in the context of non-small cell lung cancer. When I looked back and started thinking about some of the work and the different projects I worked on, I realized we've had targeted therapies in the non-small cell lung cancer space for over a decade. That, in conjunction with now we have over 20 different targeted pharmaceutical products in the marketplace today, targeting a myriad of different cancer pathways. And from that perspective, it was something that we saw as being a ripe space for us to really interrogate and see what could be learned, and where we saw the opportunities to really try to advance the integration and adoption of precision medicine, and hence our focus on non-small cell lung cancer. We couldn't think of a better space to start with, because we anticipate it's going to be reflective of other areas for which we could apply these same learnings.
Thank you. Another area that we quickly realized that we needed to just have a little bit of definition around is precision medicine testing. And when we talk about optimal testing, what do we actually mean? So Dr. Chandra, can you talk a little bit about how we put that in context.
And this was no easy task for a number of reasons. Some of the things that we talked about are what to test, when to test, who to test, and how do you actually test. And the challenge that we're grappling with as we are reconciling and trying to answer these questions is that medical guidelines are moving at a very rapid pace. And the reason they're moving at a very rapid pace is because of the plethora of advancements and literally new publications on a weekly, monthly basis that highlight some degree of clinical utility in the context of lung cancer. So where we ultimately aligned was to focus on guidelines. And we expect the guidelines to be updated on a regular basis, but again, it was our intent to be focused on making sure that there is accountability to following the medical guidelines. The other item that I think is very important to the discussion here is we all strongly felt that the testing needs to be at diagnosis, not necessarily at stage 3 and stage 4, but at even earlier stages in the diagnostic therapeutic continuum of the lung cancer patient. And there were a number of reasons for this. One is that the science has advanced so rapidly that we are now really in a position to be thinking about precision diagnostics testing at diagnosis. There is an opportunity, and we'll get into some of that later. The opportunity is to, in addition, focusing on therapy, focusing on the diagnostic molecular classification, but also prognostic information, which can help risk stratify patients in this disease.
Thank you for that context. And then I think everyone in the panel early on agreed that we wanted this to have a patient-centric approach, always remembering why is this relevant. And again, as mentioned, Terry have provided really valuable and strong insights here. Mark, do you want to try and convey some of her viewpoints on the context?
No, absolutely. Thank you very much, Susanne. And interestingly, this is the 10th anniversary of the launch of the European Cancer Patient Bill of Rights, which actually was led from Northern Ireland, and we launched in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. And one of the things that we emphasise in that, and that has very much carried forward into initiatives like this, is that the patient not only has to be at the centre, but if they're not at the centre of the process, then we just do not deliver. And I've had the privilege to work with patient advocates, including Terry, over the last decade. And what we found is that is critical to how we actually identify what the challenges are and also how we deliver. You've heard earlier from Darren that the initiative has highlighted that two-thirds of lung cancer patients are not being diagnosed appropriately with a test to allow them to actually get the precision oncology that they deserve. And that's really where we need to change things. And that's if we can do one thing in relation to this report, is to change that number, change that dynamic, so that we really deliver for lung cancer patients, then I think we will have achieved a lot. I know if Terry had been here, she would have highlighted similar issues that she has highlighted over the last number of years as an advocate, and particularly in relation to the work she's done in relation to KRAS testing.
Thanks, Mark. And as mentioned, I think we quickly realized in our discussions that the operational side is really critical if we want to move forward in identifying solutions for how do we close the gaps that we have now identified. So from an operational implementation perspective, Dawn, if you can put context to that.
Yeah, thank you. So I was just thinking back to when I was a young genetic counselor, which I still am, and when the field of precision medicine wasn't really even called precision medicine yet. It was really housed within genetics experts. We didn't even use the word genomics yet. And then all of a sudden we learned that cancers were driven by different genes, and everything changed. And what happened was a very small, tight-knit quirky community had to give up a little bit of control, and genetics and genomics has really infiltrated in a good way all aspects of medicine. But somewhere along the way, we forgot how to implement. We didn't take the time to implement. And that's where I really see a lot of the challenges. Operational challenges can be solved with implementation science, if you will. And that's where I see a real opportunity. From a payer perspective, most payers cover some genetic and genomic tests. Pick your health plan, go to their website. If it's publicly available, then you'll see they cover certain tests for certain indications. Most likely, not every appropriate patient is getting access to those tests. What if we were to do a better job with just the established, accepted test and really figure out the system? It would create this space for newer tests to slide in maybe a little more easily. So that's the perspective I have on operations, is we forgot to learn implementation or relearn implementation.
Thanks, Dawn. And Mark, do you have a comment there?
Just to come in on that, absolutely agree with you. Implementation science and health services research is something that we've somehow lost along the way. It was one of the key points that we made in the Lancet Oncology European Ground Shot Commission. And we're very good at breakthrough, but maybe we're not so good at follow through. And that's what we really need to be good at doing. And so certainly we called for, in the European Cancer Ground Shot, to have that implementation piece as a critical part of how we actually deliver. How do we reimagine cancer research and innovation, but how do we deliver it is most important.
Thank you for that comment. And you will hear, once we get into discussing some of the recommendations as well, that we spent a lot of time discussing the more regulatory and reimbursement aspect, the cost side of things. So Cecilia, if I can turn to you to provide a little bit of context on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And this is a perfect segue. So thanks, Mark. So you talk about the right implementation, and I think we heard before we start into the guidelines, which is great. But then we have to build the infrastructure. So really making sure that the test is available in good quality, reproducible, and robust testing across the multiple geographies. But the big challenge also comes into who's going to pay for it. So who's going to embrace? And I think I just heard, about really having the systems in place for payers and also for the reimbursement. So how are we going to be looking into who is responsible and who's going to take it on, the reimbursement of the test as part of the patient care? So traditionally, we have the data that's required when it gets approved by the regulatory authorities. So that's kind of the one piece in terms of the test being robust and the clinical practice. But then becomes, is a test readily available and in the labs, across multiple geographies worldwide, and the reimbursement of the test. Is it a new biomarker or is it an existing biomarker? So there's multiple models, which we hopefully will be discussing on today in terms of how to get patients access and cost not becoming a barrier, which we know it is a barrier. There is also the part of the pharmaceutical company in terms of supporting access to testing to inform the patient treatment. So that's another, there's multiple models about consortiums and coalitions, lung maps and things like that bring people together to really sponsor the patient access to testing to inform the treatment. But what is sustainable? What do we need to do to really ensure that the testing is reimbursed and is not a one-off that's paid by one specific consortium, one specific geography? So I think hopefully we'll continue with that discussion, and we'd like to hear from the audience as well.
Thanks, Cecilia. And leading on from that, we initiated some of the discussions that today often the testing is seen as technology solutions, but debating how do we move that into value-based care and improve technology assessment as we see on the drug side, but we don't see it on the test side today. So Brenda, can you enlighten us a little bit on the background here?
Sure. So in my opinion, value-based medicine in which payment is based on outcomes is inherently linked to precision medicine, because what could be a better value-based outcome than proper diagnosis and treatment? So we would focus the treatment on the correct disease and the prognosis and diagnosis of that patient, instead of potentially not following a regime at all, or following a regime that will not work. So from my perspective, the challenge is that scientifically we're in this transition phase from blockbuster medicine to precision medicine. So the science and technology are advancing faster than the operations and reimbursement frameworks. So we traditionally, and we still use terms like lung cancer and organ-based cancers, lung cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, but we need to shift into sort of a more mechanistic description of cancer, and along with that shift, develop reimbursement frameworks and operations to support the precision medicine. So from my perspective, to move to this value-based system, we have a real need for studies that are well-designed to demonstrate how testing improves patient outcomes. Because what I see a lot now from a pharma perspective is how drugs, the cost of drugs compares to the cost of hospitalization. But we need to move into this world where we have the cost of testing and what the cost of testing and the cost of not testing, how that contributes to value-based outcomes.
Thanks, Brenda. And then just circling back to actually your introduction, Daryl, talking about policies and guidelines and how that is changing fast. That was the last of the conceptual or context areas that we initially discussed around before going into the recommendations. So maybe a few words on that.
Sure, thank you, Susanne. And if we're going to discuss how best to develop strategies to improve upon our delivery of precision medicine, we're talking about involving policy development and clinical guidelines in all of these steps. So when we talk about challenges in implementation, operational challenges that Dawn talked about, or the regulatory and reimbursement challenges that Cecilia just brought up, or those challenges around value-based care and health technology assessment, it all involves different policies from different key organizations that are going to be needed to help drive forward the approach. So whether we're talking about healthcare delivery institution practice policies, we're talking about regulatory policies from our governments on regulatory oversight of new diagnostic tests, or we're talking about payer policies to better provide access to these different technologies. We are discussing policies and clinical guidelines. In order to deliver this, we need to bring our policy development and our policy conversations around to incorporate the understanding that all of us in this conference have a better understanding of than maybe those people in those policy organizations. So this, when we talk about clinical guidelines, we talk about it at all different steps. This is at the point of pathology and biospecimen collection, where we have the guidelines that are developed by the College of American Pathologists. Those CAP guidelines need to be adhered to, need to understand and represent modern policies. When we're talking about reimbursement and coverage and utilization management policies, these need to be updated and informed by all of us who have a better understanding of what that value is. So as we think about this policy environment and we think about our strategies moving forward, we need to hit those policy makers to make sure that they understand what we understand and help move forward precision oncology.
Thank you, Daryl. So moving into some of the key aspects coming out of the forum and some of the recommendations. One of them, and I think the panel really early on agreed that there is an urgent need to incorporate a precision oncology approach when it comes to both testing and treatment, making sure that we have the adequate training and education in place, for example, to make sure we support the decision-making within both the testing and the treatment aspect. Dr. Chandra, if I can turn to you, leading a lab service, from your perspective, what do you see as some of the challenges and opportunities in implementing precision oncology approach?
Thank you, Susanne. So maybe we can talk about the challenges first, and I'm happy to articulate some of these challenges. And one of the themes that you will all see is that the ideas and the perspectives that I have and we have, they are overlapping into other areas and align with the opinions of other forum members and leaders on this call. So let's start with the challenges first. We're just simply not testing enough patients. I mean, look at the percentages that we talked about earlier, and one of the reasons for those suboptimal percentage of patients receiving precision oncology therapy is the fact that we're just not testing enough patients. And oftentimes, it's the pathologist that waits for the oncologist to make the test order. And oftentimes, it's the oncologist who's like, well, pathologist, I need you to tell me what test to order. So we can certainly do better in that area. So the first point I want to make is that there's a lack of empowerment, engagement of the general surgical pathologist, of the molecular pathologist, as well as the local cancer care teams. And there's a lack of accountability. There's really, there's no reason to adhere to best practices because there's no incentivization or disincentivization of that. There's also a lack of education amongst the stakeholders on test utilization, but also the operational processes involved in specimen procurement, precision oncology testing, as well as reporting. And then finally, there are several reimbursement challenges. Now, I will agree that the reimbursement has gotten better and payers generally pay for some form of precision diagnostics testing in lung cancer, but it's not uniform and it's not standardized. And for example, what one payer's policy may be, it may be completely different than another payer's policy. Then there are other impediments such as the 14-day rule, which basically direct the costs of the laboratory testing back to a hospital institution if the patient is hospitalized. And in that case, the hospital is being reimbursed based on a DRG payment model that is antiquated and does not get regularly updated. Okay, so I think many of you will agree that challenges are actually hidden opportunities. And I, along with other leaders here, strongly feel that there is an unprecedented opportunity to unlock the value of precision diagnostics. We have to support pathology-driven testing and address the operational challenges that I've alluded to earlier that span the pre-analytical, analytical, as well as post-analytical process. We have to come up with innovative and creative ways to remove reimbursement barriers and incentivize the appropriate stakeholders. So for example, creating quality metrics that facilitate accelerated adoption of precision diagnostics and support shared accountability amongst the cancer care team. And then finally, I think we're all striving to see precision diagnostics testing implemented in all newly diagnosed early stage or late stage lung cancer. And we'll get into some of the technology opportunities, but there are opportunities to enhance that through clinical decision support systems, artificial intelligence that are deployed on digital pathology platforms.
I'd love to add to that, actually.
Absolutely.
Dr.
Go ahead,
Saunders.
Brenda.
Thank you. I fully agree in what you're saying matches my experience in operations because, as I alluded to before, I in my role in many companies, I accelerate science and science with good operations. What many people do not realize is that a lot of issues that are described as data issues, turnaround times, poor quality data are actually specimen issues because specimens are hidden within the data issues. So I think most people would be shocked to know that there really aren't regulations around specimens. There's some guidelines around specimen collection, but there aren't regulations. They say chain of custody, but it's not specific. So there's a lot of variability in collection amount, shipment time, shipment temperature, how they're processed, And all of that leads into the, a quality data result and the turnaround time. So from my perspective, one of the key levers of making precision medicine accelerate is having precision operations. And that means pulling out, in part, the specimen aspects of this to ensure we have good quality data in an appropriate time frame.
Thank you, Brenda. And some of the levers there is also focusing on the quality of care and avoidance of waste, and how that can lead into better decisions, but also avoiding any unnecessary spend. Dawn, I know that you have views on this area.
Yes, so having spent 2 years now in a health plan setting, I've learned a lot that I wish I'd known prior. And I think people may or may not realize that health plans are laser focused on quality of care for their members. We talk about caring for our members. We want to make sure they have a good experience. We also talk a lot about avoidance of waste. There's only so much in the pot, so to speak. So the more we can avoid waste, the better. So quality of care. So what does that mean to a health plan? Quality of care is the member, we call the members, not patients, getting access to the right treatment at the right time. And you hear that all the time. If a member gets access to the right treatment at the right time, they're avoiding the wrong treatment at the wrong time, and that would be the avoidance of waste. Ideally, all of that leads to better outcomes, but the first stop on the road is the quality of care, so getting the right treatment. And some people may say, well, what does quality mean to a health plan? Health plans do look at certain quality metrics that we're held to, and I love the idea brought forth that precision medicine testing and precision medicine, if it were held to that lens of quality measures, it would create that shared accountability. And I think that's a really, really important point. There's a lot that health plans have to focus on, and if there were quality measures, it would elevate precision medicine. And as far as avoidance of waste, think about what that's like for the member. The member is driving to his or her treatment, is given a certain treatment, and lo and behold, had that member had the right testing at the right time, might have avoided 8 weeks of a treatment that was less likely to work. Can you imagine that? All of that time spent, what if they don't ever know that they could have gotten that right treatment right from the get-go? So I think there's a lot that payers are looking at. We're very interested, very curious, a little bit cautious. I might talk about that later. Payers are keen to see how precision medicine testing can help us drive quality care for our members and avoidance of waste. So,
Just a quick follow-up comment on that, Dawn, and just to bring to our idea, we're going to talk a lot about this today, but how we can all work together to drive some of these things forward. Really, this group has to understand, when we talk about developing quality measures, what is a good measure that discerns what is a quality care pathway that somebody needs to go through. We need to work with payers to make sure that those quality measures are appropriate and understood and accepted by the payer community so that they can be put together and used in precision medicine going forward. So thanks for that.
Mark, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, no, just would very much agree with what Dawn said, and it's it gets back to the point that was made earlier. It's also the cost of not testing as well as the cost of testing, and I think that really sort of comes out. Would very much agree in relation to what Daryl said there, that we're going to deliver this if we work together to do it. There just recently, I'm on the board of the Cancer Drug Development Forum, and we held an event in the Netherlands, and specifically, and Peter would have spoken at it, and I would have chaired one of the sessions, but we've particularly focused on that area of the cost of not testing. And what are we denying patients? And it gets back to the quality measures, and I think that has to be, the principle has to be quality. The added extra then is that we also benefit in relation to savings. We don't waste things, but the quality and what that delivers for the patient is where we need to stand.
Agreed.
And if I could add to that,
Yeah.
from my perspective, quality too, from multiple perspectives, the payer perspective, the patient perspective, the physician perspective, because I think sometimes it's fragmented in current state, and I think we do need to be more collaborative together in defining what quality means, what the appropriate metrics would be.
Yeah, it's the fair value principle. So fair value to every stakeholder, not just to some stakeholders and not to others, that everybody, because then if you're getting something out of it, you're likely to put more into it.
So if I can build into what Mark just said, because this is perfect when you said multi-stakeholders, because that's exactly where we're going. And it starts really with, you can talk about the quality of the test, but you also had a discussion yesterday around the quality of the sample, which is a whole other area of the quality and the education, the knowledge of interpretation and implementation of the results. And I love kind of what we heard before in terms of the focus on the treatment of the correct disease and the diagnosis. So I think, we're really breaking down in three pieces, not just looking into the treatment, but looking into the diagnosis first of the patient. We see that a lot in heme. We see that a lot in beyond cancer. If you're going to cardiovascular, the diagnosis of the patient of the right disease, and then informs the treatment selection, which it could be a targeted therapy, it may not be a targeted therapy, but that will inform that, and the monitoring. And in multiple areas, the peers play a very pivotal role in terms of how to incorporate that test or that information into the patient care. If you look into the cancer, a lot of the pharma companies will sponsor testing at the beginning or for a period, but it cannot be a single stakeholder, going back to Mark's comment, that takes the ownership of the patient access as it relates to cost, but it is a multi-stakeholders. And I want to call out again, hopefully we'll talk quality, and I think Daryl, you talked about the quality of the test. Cannot forget the quality of the sample, and multiple other things. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Cecilia. And let's stay with the testing a little bit, because the technology involvement, or the evolving technology, especially within genomic testing, is allowing us much more information around a patient's opportunities. And there is ongoing discussion at the moment of, how much should we test and when should we test? Because if outcome is not driving an actionable situation, is it worth doing that? So let's stay a little bit with that. And Mark, I want to come back to you in terms of that aspect, and just, do we have the evidence and the data at the moment to really understand, is there value in comprehensive testing and testing earlier?
I think we do. I'm a big data geek. In fact, I coined the phrase recently, or a while ago actually, but reused it recently: data eat opinion for lunch. So we can all have opinions on things. Sometimes it's expert opinions, but that doesn't mean we're actually right. And so if we can actually back that up by the data intelligence that actually tells us, yes, quality of testing, yes, availability of appropriate tests, yes, that actually a multi-gene test is the way to go. And so we always need to use that lens. So it's that lens of intelligence that then points us the way. And I think we need to keep on doing that in a way that provides us with data that tells us, where are we going? Because in some situations we may not be clear. I mean, one of the things that's really important in this area is inequalities. We obviously don't want to have a situation where precision oncology actually widens inequalities rather than narrows them, because that's our aim, is to narrow them. And that's why, getting back to the point, I think we've all agreed now that that multi-stakeholder involvement where everybody is getting fair value, whether it be the industry, the regulator, the payer, the patient, and the pathologist. I think that's really important. The other thing that's really important in relation to, is having data on things like workforce. So pathologists are obviously very key to this process. If we have a problem in relation to the pathology workforce, it's very simple: no pathology, no precision oncology. You can't have one without the other. So that's really important. But I think certainly, in fact, if we look at it in relation to single gene testing is probably wasteful, both in terms of the tests, but also, more important, of the material, the precious material that the patients give to us to actually test, to decide what is the treatment options for the patient. So I think the data now is out there that multi-gene testing, panel testing as well, is the way to go. And then there are obviously subtleties in relation to how we deliver that for different diseases. Obviously here we're talking about lung cancer. The other thing to remember is lung cancer, 20% of the disease burden in Europe, pretty similar, of the cancer disease burden in Europe, pretty similar in relation to the United States, but 4% of the research effort and 4% of the research spend. So this is an understudied population. Why is that? We can speculate about that, but the fact is we need to be doing much more for lung cancer patients in relation to research and innovation. And I think if we can deliver what we're saying here in these the gaps that we've identified and the approach that we're saying that we need to go forward, we can really deliver for lung cancer patients.
Thanks, Mark. And Dr. Chandra, from this is very real for you in a everyday setting. From a clinical routine perspective, and having to actually deliver on these aspects of comprehensive testing, earlier testing in this disease stage. What is your view there?
Well, first of all, I completely agree that the medicine and the science is there. So as long as we focus on quality, we should be in good shape. There are a few things for us to consider here. The first is the topic of education. We have to give access at scale to comprehensive resources that very precisely delineate who to test, what to test, how to test, when to test, and actually what do the results mean. I think that's an area that stakeholders struggle with as well, is you have all of these genomic test results, especially from these multi-gene panels. So what does that mean as far as next steps, and what are the therapeutic decisions that need to be made? This is partially addressed by, for example, molecular tumor boards, where multidisciplinary stakeholders get together and talk about the molecular profiling results and how that leads to therapeutic decision making. But again, we need to think about that from an entirely different perspective, and again, think about it in terms of scale. The second is to create accountability and make sure that the folks who are responsible for getting the testing done are actually being held accountable. And so that first starts by enhancing and refining the guidelines and making sure that, in addition to other stakeholders, that pathologists and molecular pathologists are incorporated into expert panel discussions, and also recommendations, as well as guideline recommendations. So there are pathologists in, for example, NCCN guideline panels, but I think we can do a better job at making sure that we have more pathologists for really every disease state that can speak to not only the specific disease states, but on the general topic of precision oncology testing. The other way to create accountability is to develop KPIs, key performance indicators, to measure progress. So let's talk about some examples. What if you had a KPI for that answers what percentage of lung cancers receive precision diagnostics testing at an institution, and you have a goal of, let's say, 80% of newly diagnosed lung cancers actually undergo some form of precision diagnostics testing, and you have some form of incentivization to allow the implementation of that. What percentage of lung cancers with an EGFR mutation receive appropriate targeted therapy? That was a big hole that you all uncovered in the recent paper, and so we need to figure out a way to make the cancer care team, the pathologist included, to be responsible for achieving high quality and improved outcomes. Another question or a KPI is what percentage of lung cancers receive immunotherapy, and receive it appropriately. In other words, they do not have driver mutations, because we all know patients who have driver mutations, those are patients who are not going to benefit from immune checkpoint inhibitor therapy, and thereby, again, we're focusing on quality, we're avoiding waste, a ton of waste. There are, I'm sure, many patients with lung cancer who are getting immunotherapy, but if you were to have profiled their tumors, you would learn that, they probably weren't going to respond to the therapy. And then finally, one of the areas from a pathology perspective that doesn't get as much attention is the diagnostic utility as well as the prognostic utility, and that becomes extremely important earlier in the diagnostic therapeutic continuum. So there are molecular abnormalities that will help answer questions like, where is this tumor coming from? And is this really a lung cancer, or is it actually a metastatic cancer from elsewhere? Are there germline alterations that may have familial ramifications? We need to be thinking about it from that perspective. And finally, prognosis. There are certain biomarkers that in early stage lung cancer are actually associated with an aggressive clinical course. And so that information, in addition to the therapeutic information such as EGFR mutation, ALK fusion, PD-L1 expression in early stage lung cancer, there's also prognostic information that will be important in the quality care management of lung cancer patients.
You make a very important point there in relation to providing treatment in the situation where the test actually doesn't tell you to do that treatment. It's something Dawn and myself were talking about just before we came in. There is a danger that people say, oh, well, let's just give them the latest therapy and forget about precision medicine and precision genomic testing. And, that is not the way to go. But certainly we see that. I can think of certain situations where I've seen that happening. So that's going against what we're saying, but it's sort of saying, oh, well, because maybe the testing isn't coming in on time or whatever, people are just making decisions based on opinion, not data.
Oh, absolutely. And
so,
was there a comment? Yep.
I was just going to comment. So looping back to an earlier comment I made about perhaps building a new reimbursement framework or reimbursement structure, I can see taking these use cases and fitting them into a structure where you have payment for known actionable items versus known contributors to the disease or pathway, emerging or exploratory, and panels that, for example, would span the gene along that continuum could be reimbursed at different rates based on whether or not they're known, contributor, or emerging. So I think that I don't want the advances in science to be hemmed in by a reimbursement framework that doesn't fit. So from my perspective, we have to think about the framework to align with the new science.
Very good comment, and we'll definitely get back to reimbursement. Just want to stay a little bit longer on the guidelines, and Dr. Chandra, you alluded to some of the challenges there. I mean, just within non-small cell lung cancer, which have been our focus, there's been 17 changes to NCCN guidelines since 2021, and in some of the recent research we have done to try and understand, especially that last gap in the study of, why are patients not going on the right treatment, even if the testing information is actually there, and we do get feedback of, it's difficult to stay on top of information, they don't feel comfortable with treatment regimen that they don't know. There's almost too much happening to stay informed. Daryl, I'll be curious to understand from your perspective, because you representing PMC, you represent a broad group of stakeholders. So from that aspect, how do you see that we could do a better job in bringing the right stakeholders to the table when updating guidelines, and not only updating, but also implementing it?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there, and I'll try to be brief. We've been talking about this for quite some time, that the key is to bring all the appropriate stakeholders if we're going to get community buy-in to do that. But that's been a real challenge, especially in developing guidelines. There's lots of different sets of guidelines that are being used. They're being used differently by different providers, healthcare delivery providers, and they're being built with a different set of groups that are contributing to the expertise for developing those guidelines. And by and large, guidelines are followed by doctors. So we need to really make sure that those stakeholders are right. And I think this has been something that's been absent in this. The feedback that NCCN gets from outside stakeholder groups hasn't been adequate. They do look to patients to find out what are some of those key aspects for clinical guideline development that are needed from a patient perspective, but they aren't talking to a lot of other stakeholder groups, including some industry groups that are really well advanced in their knowledge of the value that these things bring, that these technologies bring. So if we're going to put them in guidelines, we need to bring everybody together. I think that the Personalized Medicine Coalition has an opportunity to help do that, because we do have a kind of a vast membership with all different kinds of stakeholders, but we're going to have to work with everybody in this room and everybody online in order to do that appropriately. The second thing that I'm going to bring up is a disparities issue, and I was discussing this with other panelists a little bit earlier, but even when we develop clinical guidelines and we develop quality measures that say, okay, if you're going to deliver care in lung cancer, it should meet these quality standards. They have to be realistic for all of the populations that this affects. And this is a hard decision that we'll have to make. Sarah and I were talking about this earlier. We can say that this is what you need to do to meet a quality standard for the delivery of care in precision oncology. But if we're talking about maybe some rural, under-resourced healthcare delivery institutions across the world, they might not be capable of bringing those technologies forward and delivering those things to meet those standards. So we need to think about how to do this in a realistic way. Mm-hmm. There are poor countries, there are poor areas of every country where there's hospitals that at in the current system aren't going to be able to meet those quality standards and to meet those guidelines. So let's also begin to talk about how we kind of develop the system and make sure that we get better care to those communities as well.
Yeah, and I think that would love to hear from you, Sarah, on this as well, because I think you touch upon a little bit of a discussion on what is adequate testing and what is comprehensive testing, and is it always the right thing, or is it always possible to do comprehensive testing? So, Sarah, maybe your view and then kind of like an industry view on this.
Sure. From an industry perspective, I think adequate versus comprehensive is almost a trick question, to be totally frank. I think a better way we may collectively want to think about it is really focusing on ensuring that everyone has access to quality healthcare, and that they're able to obtain accurate, timely, and reliable precision medicine testing that can inform treatment decisions. I think that we're not there yet, quite frankly, and I think thinking about equity in that context of what's adequate versus comprehensive, I think will be really important. What we also need to think about is comprehensive today is not necessarily comprehensive tomorrow. So we need to ensure that comprehensive testing is really enough to keep pace with available treatments. And we don't also, as part of this, Daryl and I were talking before, as he mentioned, create greater disparity gaps. So the space is evolving so rapidly, and I oftentimes get told, well, this great new technology is available that can do X, Y, and Z. And my job and one of my responsibilities is making sure we launch our therapies globally. We make sure that we have solutions that allow everyone to get access. And that oftentimes means we can't always use the newest, shiniest toy. That being said, we know that there's evolution of technology, and maybe it's providing multiple solutions. Maybe it's providing that platform that allows for those that have the means to get that, but that you also provide solutions that are, sufficient enough to allow people to get access to their appropriate treatments. And one of the things I think Daryl touched on a little bit is that's why it's going to also be critical to advocate that clinical guidelines are able to rapidly change to fit the evolution of technology, to fit the evolution of treatment care. And as part of that, they're flexible as well. As Daryl mentioned, it's not a one-size-fits-all opportunity. There are varying levels of quality across. We need to make sure we're taking that into consideration. The other thing I would say from a sports analogy, and I've heard this from multiple panel members today, is it's not an individual sport. I think one of the problems is the healthcare system and ecosystem is exceptionally complex. I think we oftentimes fail to realize how much of an impact this has on our ability to deliver quality care. Quite frankly, and I think Daryl touched on this, it's not just about getting stakeholders together in a room. It's about making sure that you're getting comprehensive voices heard, which is part of this forum, basically having all of you online, this diverse group of stakeholders. I think as we evolve in this space, making sure we get the pathologists together, we get the oncologists together, we get the patients, most importantly, patient advocacy groups, all together to talk about this, to ensure we can close these gaps that were brought forward with the publication. But I would say more importantly than closing the gaps of today is making sure we don't create new gaps. And we're proactively thinking about how as a collective society and ecosystem, we're ensuring we don't create those gaps again in the future. And we're proactively thinking about how to mitigate and solve for those.
Thank you. And just last question on guidelines, because I would love to address it from a payer perspective as well. How critical is the payer aspect on guidelines, and do you think that guidelines eventually impact clinical decisions?
So guidelines are really one of the key touchstones for most health plans in making what they call medical necessity guidelines for coverage. And so guidelines really are critical, and health plans generally, their medical necessity criteria are not going to overreach beyond guidelines, because health plans do not practice medicine. Health plans are there to offer coverage and benefits, and really look to the clinical community to tell us to be our go-to for what is the standard of care. So what if there isn't a societal guideline? What if they're ancient? That happens. Peer-reviewed published evidence would be that other tier to look to if there were no guidelines. But what has happened in the space, and I think this is probably a good story, is when I was taking my boards as a genetic counselor in never mind, that wasn't the year. There were only 100 genetic diseases on that magnitude that had tests for them. Super easy. Can you imagine how easy that? We could all take the boards. We'd do great. Now there are tens of thousands of tests. They're in categories: screening, treatment selection, monitoring, prognostic. And there are multiple companies that offer similar but not the same test. So just imagine how challenging it is for a health plan, or even an entity like here in Northern Ireland, for the entities that make those decisions, how challenging it is. So you can't expect a health plan to go above and beyond guidelines. We wouldn't get enough sleep. So you can see where guidelines are critically important, because they're all a health plan has, because there's just too much going on for us to keep up. And just another kind of bit on guidelines, what's happened at many health plans, at least in the US, is they have kind of said, we don't have the bandwidth and we don't have the expertise. There is a recognition that at health plans that there isn't the in-house expertise, and they will delegate the decisions around medical necessity guidelines and even prior authorization to third parties who have risen up. Think about the pharmacy benefit manager. There's now genetic benefit management. That word didn't exist when I was in school. And so what are those groups looking to? They're looking to guidelines. So sometimes I say, if I'd known better when I was calling on payers, I really should have been calling on the guideline entities, because the payers aren't there to make medical decisions. They're there to take a pulse of what's happening, what's the standard of care, and one of the best ways to know that is the guidelines.
Thank you, Dr.
Susanne, could I add a comment here?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, thank you. And I think Cecilia will follow up. Thank you so much, Dawn, for providing that insight. I think we are at very transformative times with real world data insights about the gaps within the same institution regarding guidelines, or in common terms or clinician terms, Sankey charts. It's all over the place. I think we really, as an industry and forums and entities, should really share these real world data insights to even really start comparing and contrasting the guidelines. It's a constantly evolving space, and the whole purpose of value-based reimbursement is not even addressed if you really look into it. Value-based, sort of insights are very much important. And in one of the biggest challenges is like the prior comment about, access to testing or access to treatments. I think none of us have spoken about AI. There can be a whole day on that. Being in that field lately is how do you really integrate information that's coming in into the workflow process. I think pathologists are doing a better job than oncologists. I'm sure Dr. Chandra appreciates this. If I'm putting in information about a patient, we are at fascinating times how AI can bring in what are the latest treatments, NCCN guidelines, what are the latest tests, and even match it with which insurance company is covering what test. So I think there should be really more and more open forums about bringing in tech-enabled augmentation or access to information. I gave a very simple TEDx talk, not a personal promotion on this. Really, I think we are at really innovative times to really access innovation, which will change guidelines or even kind of bring more cadence and discipline to guidelines.
Cecilia, did you want to come in as well?
She said move on.
Oh, okay. We'll move on. I'll keep us on reimbursement. I promised that we would come back on reimbursement, which I think the reimbursement and funding is always it's often cited as one of the key reasons that we are seeing testing denied or not the right testing being done. And there is an appreciation that the reimbursement model for the diagnostic side is significantly different from the testing side. Cecilia, I would love to hear your opinion on that. Have worked in this space for multiple years and have been struggling with that aspect as well. Do you see a change needed? And, potentially should the test be covered under the drug reimbursement? Oh,
we might have technical difficulties with Cecilia.
We might have. Sarah, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to pick that up?
So rephrase one more time, sorry.
Yeah, so reflecting on the reimbursement system and how that's significantly different between the testing and the drug side, do we need to rethink reimbursement for the testing?
I think we 100% need to rethink about it. If you think about the total cost of diagnostic testing and how much they comprise of our healthcare spend, it's really minimalistic. I think what you've heard here today is that the value of those tests cannot be underestimated. I think one of the things that just really burned me when the publication came out was that 36% number, right? And that wasn't solely the testing component itself, but it's a huge driver for sure. And I think when you think about a lot of times the diagnostic companies, the reimbursement is paltry at best, right? You're seeing a lot of companies not bringing forward tests. You're seeing a lot of testing not occur because of the reimbursement being so low. So I really think that, as a collective community, we need to place higher value on diagnostic testing. It's been highly commoditized for way too long. And quite frankly, it's under continual pressure from a pricing perspective as well. And I think it's really going to be a detriment if we don't do something to change that paradigm.
Yeah. Dawn, I'll go
sorry,
to...
Susanne. I know you had asked me a question, and I was trying to go in and disconnected myself, so apologies. Do you want to repeat that?
Yeah, so Cecilia, we had Sarah cover in the meantime. Apologize for that. So just in sake of time, I'll try to move us on. But good to know you're back, Cecilia.
That's perfect. And at one point, let's go back to the educational piece in terms of the guidelines, the published review evidence, and also the healthcare plan. So I'd like to comment on that, but find the right time so we keep on track.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Cecilia. Dawn, I know that you've had some discussions with Brenda on this as well. So maybe if you want to tag team on some of your views here.
Perfect. Actually, Brenda and I had a discussion about a separate aspect of our work together, but I have an idea, and it's a bit controversial, but I've been known to speak out and up, and that is, why is it that we hold the precision medicine test to the outcomes? And I've said this in other forums. We don't say to the MRI manufacturer, are you going to make sure that hip surgery goes well? Right? We don't do that. But an MRI is a diagnostic. So the diagnostic, whether it's screening, predicting which treatment you'll match to, monitoring, is really to inform treatment decisions. Does that precision medicine test do a better job than the existing standard of care? There may be no existing standard of care, but in many cases, precision medicine tests are coming in and they're entering a space where there is some standard of care for that clinical use case. So I would challenge others to think the test itself is really there to help inform the decision making. And does it do a better job at predicting who's more likely to respond to treatment? The job of the treatment is to help the patient. That's not the job of the test. And I think we should decouple that a little bit. And so there was something Brenda said that I've been sitting here for like 30 minutes waiting for my chance. So,
Mark, I think you had a comment as well.
Well, the more probably touches on the value proposition and the economic proposition, but I'll bring it up now because it probably segues nicely into that. This is work that we did with Diaceutics and a number of other partners, including Salutum Insights, where we actually looked over the last 30 years at all the drugs that have been approved in oncology and looked at them to see whether they were precision medicine associated or one size fits all, and then looked at the R&D spend. And actually, probably don't believe this, but actually the precision oncology ones were a lot more better value than money than the one size fits all. That data is in the pack that the people who are joining online have in the virtual library. So precision oncology can deliver value-based care for patients.
Well, and I think to that point, just from a total overall cost, time to getting these drugs into the market, if you think about if you are going into a targeted or selected population, the size of the population needed to show a differential over standard of care becomes much less. Not to mention you should be able to see that efficacy come up much quicker than you would if you were taking a non-targeted approach, right? And so I think it's all along the development continuum that you can save money and see value from taking a precision medicine approach.
And that's essentially what the paper showed. So read that paper, okay?
Let me just, real quick, just to readdress the analogy with the MRI. I think in order to make that analogy, we need to think about the economics. Everybody who gets a hip replacement is going to get an MRI. But in the case of lung cancer, if you're thinking about crizotinib as a treatment, everybody needs to be tested for ALK mutation, but only about 2 or 3% of patients are going to actually get that treatment. So there's an economic component to it that needs to be figured into that decision.
Very good. I want to just make sure that we remember the patient aspect in this, the patient-centric approach that we took in our discussion. Again, I know that if Terry had been here, her voice had been very clear on helping us address that. And one of the things that she brought to the discussion as well was, how do we remember the patient aspect? How do we enable them to become a partner in their own patient journey and in making the right decisions for them? So Terry is not here, so I'll just open to the panel if someone wants to kind of like...
I'll maybe start the conversation. Something that we did with the European Cancer Patient Coalition was actually produce a personalised medicine booklet that actually, among other things, sort of highlighted, well, what are the questions that you need to ask your clinician in relation to precision oncology? How do you actually look at doing it as a shared decision-making process? What's the education piece that we need to provide, both for the patient but also for the healthcare professional, because they may not be aware of the different options. So I think it's that sort of joint decision-making piece, that way in which we actually can work together, and also that way in which patient advocacy groups particularly can help to advocate for precision medicine, because they want it as, they want it as part of the standard of care. They want that to be delivered as any other therapy would be delivered. But it's again back to that partnership and looking at ways in which everybody benefits.
And I'd just like to add to that, because I think when I first got in the oncology space, I'll share a quick story. I remember seeing for some of the metastatic oncology drugs that the overall response rate and efficacy was about 30%. And that was quite frankly best in class. And I was thinking, if this were my family member and I was having a discussion with a physician, and I said, what is the likelihood that this drug is going to work for me and it's going to have success? And they told me 30%. And I said, how and when will you know if this will work for me? And they said, well, wait a few months, we'll do a scan. If it's working, great. If it's not, we'll think about what the next step is. And for me, from a patient perspective, thinking of family members who have had cancer, it's about changing the conversation, changing that partnership, changing that dialogue, and really saying, look, we've done these various tests. Here's what we're seeing. You either have a very aggressive form or it's not as aggressive, or, we don't have a treatment option now in the context of Terry. She's got a KRAS G12D mutation, right? So she talks openly about that. So I'm not sharing anything special in that context, but, and saying that this is the treatment that is right for you at this time point in your journey. And then using testing and diagnostics to help monitor that, to seek to understand, are they still responding to treatment? Because there's, data that shows also if you start to not respond, the earlier you intervene and add a secondary therapy or you change therapies, the better long-term prognosis you're going to have. So I think from a not necessarily a patient myself, but thinking of family members who have gone through it, having that information, having that knowledge, and being to really understand, I think is critically important.
So thinking back, wearing my clinician hat, cancer is scary, right? When someone learns they have cancer, their brain just kind of goes on that, when your ears ring, when you're uncomfortable or scared. And then you bring in the topic potentially of genomics or genetics. Genomics and genetics are scary. When I was still young, practicing genetic counselor, people didn't really want to come see a genetic counselor, right? So these are both scary concepts. Patients, even if they know enough to say, wait a minute, is this the best treatment? Wait, I've heard about some sort of genetics. They're scared. And so they really look to their clinician, and their clinician becomes their hope. And so it's not entirely fair to expect patients. I know patients need to advocate for themselves, but think about it. We're talking about cancer and genomics, genetics. That's a lot to swallow. And so it's really incumbent on our stakeholder community to give physicians and systems that clinical decision support, and to give them the support and the scaffolding that they need in order to do their best work, because the patients are depending on these physicians.
And one of the things that was brought to the table in the discussion also on the patient aspect is the diversity and inclusion. And it was brought up a little bit earlier in the discussion today as well. Brenda, I know you were also vocal about that in our discussion. So maybe if you can share, Brenda, a little bit about how do you think we need to evolve there?
Sure. And this, first of all, thank you for bringing me into the conversation. When this forum started, I made these comments because of my background growing up in rural America and not having, easy access to quality healthcare or healthcare at all in some cases. So when, as time moved on last fall, my family found ourselves in a situation where we got the terrible news that my niece's 5-year-old daughter has high-risk leukemia. And on top of that, a few weeks later, we found that my other niece's son has high-risk neuroblastoma. So this obviously was traumatic to the family. Luckily, we have some physicians and nurses and physician assistants in the family to navigate this complex medical system. But to I think Sarah's point earlier, or Don's point, what if you don't have this guidance? The patients are scared. I want people to think about DEI not just from a diversity, like a race ethnicity perspective, which is critically important, but also from an equity perspective, socioeconomic class, and inclusion. And I focus on the inclusion because being from a rural place, in my experience, the farther that one gets away from like a major academic medical center, the harder it is to find physicians who may be as up to date as they could be on medical advancement. So for me, the E and I part of DEI are, I think, should be noted. And to, I think, as Mark's comments around advocacy groups, awareness and knowledge for patients will be critical in bridging that gap.
And I mean, I think the other thing we have to think about our responsibility as Europeans, as Americans, to the rest of the world. And I don't think we've done that well enough in this space. So we need to think about how are we going to support this in low and middle income countries where we're going to have 60% of the cancer deaths by 2040. And so that's a different conversation, but it's a conversation we need to be having, and we need to be having it now. And I think it's really the responsibility of the haves to also provide not only for the other halves, but also for the have-nots.
Thank you for that.
I was just going to add, it was the discussion Daryl and I had earlier to that same effect, is that as we think about global launching, making sure that we're taking all of that into consideration. And from a diversity and inclusion perspective, as we design precision medicine solutions as well, ensuring we've got diversity in our clinical trials is also critically important, because the reality is we want to seek to understand that whatever precision medicine solution we have works for everybody. And one of the challenges I've seen happen in the past with some precision medicine opportunities is we tend to have very homogeneous, especially phase 1, phase 2 trials. And when you go into a phase 3 clinical trial, you may get surprised. And that surprise is often because you're going into a more heterogeneous population. I would like us to see us moving to a state where we have that greater diversity and inclusion up front in our trials and kind of throughout the course. And then we're thoughtful as we think about launching into the global world about these different socioeconomical, impacts and what we can do to try to address those.
Could I add a comment there? I think in the context of not only in trials, I have not seen in the context of test development. You really need more and more diverse populations and ethnicities, because at the end of the day, the test is going to provide the guidance to the treatment or a trial option. 1 in 3 to 2 patients need a trial option out there. So I think really the whole diversity sort of, paradigm applies a lot to the backbone of precision medicine, which is into precision testing.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how standard lab reference ranges might change the more information we have about more diverse populations, about what truly is standard and in range and quote unquote healthy.
I want to bring in something a little bit more conceptual that we discussed during the forum meeting. So I'll pass it to you, Daryl. So so I'll put you on the spot now, but you'll have a few seconds. So we discussed the value of hope, or the cost of hope for patients, and how do we put a value to that, or how do we quantify that as part of the whole patient discussion? And I appreciate it's still conceptual, but would be curious, Daryl, just to have your thoughts around this concept.
Sure. Thank you, Susanne. And I think this brings into our conversation a couple of things that have come up already. And when we think about value parameters in general, but especially the value of hope, we need to make sure that what Mark had talked about a little earlier, that we understand all different stakeholders' concepts and parameters of measuring value. This can't be an exercise. We talk about health technology assessment for payers, for example. This can't be just what that value assessment is to payers, because they have by definition, they have to think about population value parameters. But when we talk about hope, and what that value brings. That's a patient, that's an individual patient parameter, and that's what personalized medicine's about. And there's nobody that wants to disregard hope in their value assessment when they're assessing the value of something. What does it bring if you have a small percentage of a full recovery from disease and you hope for it? What value does that bring to your care? Nobody wants to dismiss it, but some stakeholders have to prioritize other value aspects. The patient is always going to value hope, and they're going to value improved outcomes. They're going to value what this treatment means to them. So we need to incorporate it. It's difficult to do, but it's something that we have to do. The other point that I'll bring up is around the disparities again. If we take into account all of these value assessment measures, do we then set up further disparities in personalized medicine? We need to think about it from an overall community perspective.
Really good question you had about hope. And it's just interesting because last week we ran a Europe-American Forum on Cancer in Dublin. Had the president of ASCO, Chief Medical Officer of ASCO, president of the European Cancer Organization. So a really high-level, very successful meeting. But the president of the European Cancer Association or Organization, Zaba Degli, said, we're in the business of giving hope, but we're also in the business of actually delivering hope for ourselves. So it's also important. It's obviously critically important to the patient, but it's also important to the clinician who's delivering the treatment that they have hope in terms of the new developments will actually lead to new treatments. So I think that hope aspect needs to be captured for everybody in that sort of discussion.
Very good. And I will say that one of the things I truly have enjoyed with the forum and the discussions that we've had is everyone's passion, everyone's input. And I think, and I've said this earlier today, I think my hardest task today is probably keeping us on time because there's so much that we want to say. We have approximately 10 minutes left, and I just want to give everyone in the panel an opportunity to address aspects that hasn't come up yet, but that you want to address. And Cecilia, want to start with you because you marked earlier that you wanted to come back on education and guidelines.
Yeah, so thanks, Susanne. So as I listen, I'm going to get this to the scope on the education, but I also want to call out the multiple efforts that we have across the industry. So I just kind of pass it on the privilege of being the chair for the Precision Cancer Consortium. For those of you that are not aware of that, there are 7 large pharma companies. So it's Roche, Bayer, Lilly, AstraZeneca, Novartis, GSK, and J&J. And the whole idea of the Precision Cancer Consortium is on enabling quality testing. But one of the things that we came up around and identify is a part of education, right? So the education on the guidelines, but also how to implement the guidelines, how the patients talk about their disease. I mean, the fear that we heard before. So one of the initiatives has been bringing what we're calling a networking of the consortia. So there is another consortium calling from testing to treatment, so FT3, which is focusing on patients. We have ACGP, we have ECGP, and we have BLOVEX. So we have a lot of different initiatives. So what we're trying to do is kick off we did kick off at ESMO, we're going to have another one, and everybody's invited at ASCO. So I am using this Susanne, on May 31st to join this network event. But it's really about, we have all these initiatives, but they are working sometimes in silos. So how can we bring them together and strengthen the education? So I wrote it down, the guidelines, the published evidence, the peer reviewed, but not just wait for that, but how fast it can be incorporated into clinical practice and not wait for deadlines. The healthcare plans don't have the expertise. We just heard that. How can we have that? How can we implement the education at the medical school? So, literally yesterday, there was a artificial intelligence and precision medicine panel at Columbia University in New York talking about that. And the attendance was primarily with students. But how do they incorporate that into their education as they grow to become and take our place into the future? So it takes really a village. I think somebody mentioned that before. take effort. So I think what I would put my call is to actually bring all of us together, all these different initiatives, to educate the multiple stakeholders that we touch together. So that's the only way we're going to be able to move forward. So that was my comments, and thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. And I feel I want to pass that on to Daryl, because that was something we discussed earlier today, the kind of like, how do we ensure that all of the efforts that's happening at the moment is not happening in silos? And there is probably a lot of overlap. So I know you have a view on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Cecilia. You set me up perfectly for my comment, my closing comment for the group as well. And that is that we want to work, the Personalized Medicine Coalition and Diaceutics want to work now to coordinate all of these efforts that Cecilia just talked about, FT3, ACGMP. All of these different groups are working on strategies to advance things, and they're working without really recognizing what other groups are doing. And, that means that we're duplicating efforts, but it also means that there's competition in moving some efforts forward. And it also means that some groups that should be working together are not. So this is our next step at the Personalized Medicine Coalition with Diaceutics, with Point 32, with everybody, is to put together what we're calling a roadmap, an implementation strategic roadmap, where we can talk about where we are and how to get where we need to be and coordinate all of these efforts. By doing that, by coordinating everybody's efforts, it's going to be complicated because there's a lot going on. But by coordinating everybody and getting everybody who's doing something involved in one roadmap development, we can get everybody's buy-in, and then that roadmap will be community-wide. So that's our next step in moving this forward. All of these efforts and all of these areas that we talked about are going to be part of a large, quite large, but broken down thoughtfully strategic roadmap to move forward.
Thanks, Daryl. Turn to the virtual attendees again. Brenda, any final thoughts from your side or any call to action that you want to pass along?
Yes, thank you. Much like I'd liked for us to pull testing out of and have analysis around the contribution of testing or not testing, pull that away from the discussion around the value of drugs. Again, I'd like to emphasize that I think it's a critical gap that we have biospecimen issues that are hidden as data issues. There are CAP-CLIA guidelines, but they don't go far enough to actually elucidate key needs around biospecimens. And I believe that a lot of people would be shocked to know that much medical research is irreproducible, and one of the primary causes is poor biospecimen collection. So it's really a critical function to producing quality data consistently, and with this, with all of this acceleration to using AI in large data sets, my fear is that without this, AI is going to produce answers quickly, but the wrong answers. So that's my call to action.
Thanks, Brenda. And I feel, in a way, you've set up for Kamala to go next. I know you have a passion for AI and data. So any final comments from you?
Sure. No, thank you. Thank you very much. And Brenda, thank you for the comment, because the type of the data that exists out there is, most of it is nonsensical. That's what is happening. That's why the myth about AI. And I think really as an industry, there is a responsibility to generate the right data sets. We are just coming into that mode with the longitudinal patient journeys, especially in oncology, that are coming out. For example, let's take NTRK, right? We didn't even implement appropriately EGFR-based treatments. How can an NTRK patient be on that particular treatment, right? So really, I think as an industry, we really need to have more and more open databases between public and private. This is my learning and insight as a rare disease patient. So, wherein I think the cancer moonshot should involve some really, sort of top real world data institutions that are out there sitting on really very unique data points, that could really transform many of these testing gaps and treatment access gaps.
Thank you. And Dr. Chandra, from your aspect, and from the lab aspect, what's the key thing that we need to take away?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of discussion here and comments that I completely agree with, and that is that we have to come together, eliminate the silos, We have to address the barriers to testing, and we have to create a roadmap to where we are and where we need to go. The opportunity for patients with lung cancer, as I mentioned before, is unprecedented. And I'll give you an anecdotal example of a patient that we tested actually this past week. This is a patient who had a mass in their involving the small intestine and the large intestine. That was resected and that was sent to pathology. And what was interesting about this mass, it was originally thought to either be a colon cancer or a GYN cancer because the patient had a history of GYN cancer. We went ahead and did precision diagnostics testing, and we found an EGFR exon 19 deletion. There was no way that any clinician was thinking that this was a lung cancer involving the intestine, but it was the diagnostic information that was rendered through the precision diagnostic testing that actually established that this is not a colon cancer. It is not a GYN malignancy, but is it indeed a lung cancer involving the colon, and that's extremely rare. And that was a very powerful learning moment for me and my team, which we continue to learn on a daily basis with these patient examples. The patient treatment was going to be completely changed. There is an FDA-approved therapy that's available for the patient. So we need to think about the patient and put it in their perspective. And if I had a family member who had lung cancer, I would want them to get tested right at diagnosis. It's because of stories like this. And finally, I don't think that we should lose sight of the topic of digital pathology and artificial intelligence, as was brought up earlier. We will get to the point where pathologists will have AI algorithms that will be delivering clinical decision support through digital pathology platforms. And they will be able to know at the point of diagnosis whether the patient is going to have an aggressive clinical course or whether the patient has a high propensity of having actionable alterations or whether they don't. So we will be in a better position to make sure that the right test is performed for the right patient at the right time every time. So I'm very excited to be here and collaborate with you all. I'm equally excited about what the future holds for patients with lung cancer. I know the percentages are not where we would like them to be as far as who's tested and who's treated. But if you take other disease states, the percentage of patients who are receiving next generation sequencing precision diagnostics is less than 15%. So we're already doing a pretty good job with lung cancer, but we certainly have a long way to go.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. Dawn, can I turn to you for final comments?
So I've had a chance to think about this final comment, and there's an expression that I heard in England and I hear here in Northern Ireland, which is to look after yourself, or I'm looking after you. I know what it means, but we don't use that term very often in the States. And it really strikes me that that's what we need to be doing, is we need to be looking after these patients, and we need to do it urgently. So if I can change the expression a little bit, I think we need to look after patients urgently because they can't wait.
Thank you. Mark?
It's the 1st of May, 2024. By my reckoning, there's at least 20 credible treatments for non-small cell lung cancer. But how are we going to get those 20 treatments to all lung cancer patients if we're only testing 1/3 of them? Figure the math. Let's do something better, and this is a first step in that direction.
Thank you, Mark. And Sarah, I'll let you have the last word.
So I would just like to echo, I've heard a lot of topics, on the challenges, but I think, as someone said earlier from the panel, challenges are really opportunities. And to Mark's point, I think we should all be impassioned, and I know many of us on this forum are impassioned. It's why we're all here today, to be the change, to be a part of it, to help drive it, to gather together, to think about what each of us as individuals and collectively we can do to change those numbers. Because I think many of us, when we took and digested that practice gap paper, and we've seen other groups doing similar exercises, it's all extremely disheartening. The fact that these individuals are not getting access to high quality treatment and care and the right testing they deserve is just, quite frankly, an atrocity of sorts. And so I just would support everything my colleagues have echoed. It's about education, awareness, diversity, inclusion, access to testing, and then making sure that once you have those test results, physicians know how to use those test results and ensure that their patients are getting the right treatments.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to thank the panel very much for, again, all your viewpoints, the discussions, your passion. You will have a little bit of a break now, but we will bring you back for the Q&A. So everyone in the room, everyone that is following virtually, get your questions ready for the panel. We want to engage all of you at this time. So Denny will come back and run interactive session to engage everyone.
So to the virtual audience as well as the audience here, oh, I need a microphone, excuse me. To the virtual audience as well as the audience here, now is your chance to provide some input. I don't know about you, but there's so much to chew on here. Where do we get started? And what should we do? And how realistic do you think this is based on everything you heard today, based on what you know from your own involvement with this? And the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a polling technology to basically help you answer questions. So I'm just going to take a second to talk about the polling technology. This is Slido.com. You can take your smartphone and you can go to the QR code there, and you can actually get to Slido and get ready to take the polling questions. We have 8 questions, so I'm going to work you a little bit, but I'm going to work you fast and furious for only 15 minutes, perhaps a couple minutes less. And if you can't get to that through your phone, you can go to Slido.com and put that 7-digit PIN code in. As Susanne mentioned, and I'll just say this for a second to give people a chance to get to Slido, because when I've used this before, sometimes it takes a minute to get on it, and I want everybody to participate. The Q&A is right after this, and we're going to use both your input during this session as well as any other questions that you have to really test the panel. This is your chance to ask the panel questions. So we're going to start with question number 1, if we could move to that. And I'll read the question, not every word, but the forum has reasserted their belief that every patient has the right to have access to optimal precision tests for their disease based on testing guidelines and medical necessity to support their diagnostic and prognostic determination before treatment. And so I want you to respond. To what extent do you agree with this statement? As you respond, it will come up on the screen. Okay, we had an initial response. That's good. We'll wait for others to start responding. Okay, we're starting to get some other responses. We'll let people take a minute to answer this question. You're in Slido. This question should be on your screen. You just basically indicate the response that you want. We've had 16 respondents so far. I want to see a few more respondents. Okay, so we've had more totally agree. That's why somewhat agree has dropped. So every patient has the right to access to precision tests to support their disease based on testing guidelines and the medical need for both diagnostic and prognostic determination. Let's try to get our number up a little bit more. This is an active poll. We will be using this information to finalize our roadmap, to finalize our white paper. 32, that's good. I have a personal goal. I'd like to see 100 responses, and I'm going to put that out there right now. That's our stretch goal. We want to get 100 responses at least by the end of these 8 questions. Okay, 36 responses. We're getting a lot of totally agree, a small minority of somewhat agree. So you're seeing some people who feel like this is too strong of a statement. Most of you think this is a statement you totally agree with. So we're up to 38. I think in the interest of time, because the preponderance is totally agree, we don't have a lot of diversity of opinion, and we do have many parts of this day to go through. I think I'll move to the second question. The forum recommends that institutions urgently incorporate a precision oncology approach, ensuring physician training, access to the latest education, and adequate support in decision-making related to precision testing and treatment. To what extent do you agree with this statement? We always have one that comes right out the gate. I see that right away. So, precision oncology approach to training, ensuring that they have access to the latest education and adequate support. We're getting a very kind of similar response. Oh, good. We have somebody who somewhat disagrees with this. So this is what we're looking for, some diversity of opinion. Okay. All right. Strong agreement, but there is a significant minority that only somewhat agrees or somewhat disagrees. Nobody totally disagrees. Okay. All right, well, we're coming up to about the same number of respondents as before. And so perhaps, again, in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next question, which is an open text question. The forum wishes to encourage institutions that have already moved to a precision oncology approach to illustrate their best practices and provide a roadmap to peers to support operational implementation of a precision oncology approach more actively. What institutions do you think should be invited to showcase their best practices and why? So this is an interesting question. If we have outstanding institutions, no matter where they are in the world, we can learn from them. This sort of benchmarking and case study is very helpful for other institutions. You have to actually type in the name of the institution, and if you have a moment to say why, that would be very helpful as well, but at least the name of the institution is really what we're hoping to get. Okay. Very good. Without being U.S.-centric, I can't change my accent. It would be great to get some examples outside the U.S. as well. So those of you that are participating that are non-U.S. based, if you have, there we go, thank you. Some institutions that are non-U.S., that would be very helpful. Very good. Thank you. For whoever gave us 3 examples in one reply, thank you. That's very good. I recognize this takes more work to actually put this in. Okay, the Marsden. I live close to the Marsden, so glad to see that's a best practice site. And certainly MSK. Oshner, very good. Okay, I'll let this go for just a little bit longer, just because I think this is kind of very rich information that you're providing, and it will be very helpful for us. And I see one participant still typing. Two participants typing. Okay. This is this is great. Karolinska, yep. All right. I don't want to cut anybody off, but I'm going to move to the next question, which is another multiple choice question. The forum believes that to ensure the quality of care, physicians should be positively incentivized via quality metrics and value-based care payment programs to implement optimal testing before a treatment decision is made. How far away do you think your country or institution is from being able to implement such an approach? So it's physician incentivization from both a quality of care and also a value-based care payment program incentivizing physicians. How far away do you think they are from this? All right. Change takes time. That's one thing this answer is showing me, is change takes time. Okay, so we have, I think we have a distribution that's going to stay fairly steady, so I will move on to the next question, which is an agree-disagree question. Where precision medicine assessments are being done, a greater focus needs to be put on the cost of not testing with regards to the benefits of avoiding waste at the same time as improving quality. Do you agree with that statement or disagree? So where they are being done, where these assessments are being done, looking at the cost of not testing. Okay, very strong agreement on that. So I'm gonna cut this one short and move on to the next question. To help implement the best testing regimen for patients and to enable subsequent treatment choices to be based on comprehensive clinical information, the forum recommends that the choice of testing should move to a reflex choice determined by the pathologist, empowering the pathologist to apply the best knowledge available on molecular insight and support with relevant interpretation will best inform the physician's treatment choice. So putting the pathologist really in the driver's seat here, do you agree or disagree with this? Okay. So significant agreement, but also significant disagreement. Again, we're making our recommendations to be provocative, but realistic. Okay, I've got up to the number I've been at before. Let's move to our next question. Thank you for your response. Patient testing journeys are often opaque and frustrating. A suggestion from the forum is for patient advocates to measure the cost of hope and capture the benefits specifically from precision medicine for patients. A measurement of the cost of hope would incorporate patient involvement and awareness in their testing, allowing them to be better partners and self-advocates in their own care powered by increased knowledge and well-being. To what extent do you agree with this statement? And I'm thinking about the conversation we just heard, particularly Don's comments about it can be scary. It can be scary. Cancer can be scary. Genetic and genomics can be scary. But getting patients involved. Okay. All right, so some variation of agreement and somewhat disagreement. All right, I'm up to sort of my high 30s number. We have one last question, and I want to have maximum participation on this question, and then we're going to move to question and answer after this. So our final question for your participation is, how do you envisage using the summit discussion and support materials after attending today? Tick multiple boxes if you wish. So what are you going to do with everything that you learned today and all the material that you have available to yourself? I appreciate the honesty of those that are answering the last remark. So I recognize this is very quick getting input from you. I will, when I sum up at the end of today's session, additional comments, you're welcome to make them through the platform that we set up for you. But I want to thank everybody for participating in this polling, and we will use this information to finalize our white paper and also for our roadmap. And I want to turn it back now to Susanne and the panel, where we're going to be going into Q&A. Thank you.
So we have questions coming in. That is fabulous, and keep it coming. I will be monitoring here. Also just want to say that if we don't get to all the questions, we will make sure that we get the panel view on them and then respond offline after the meeting. There is actually a number of questions that is circling around the same topic, so I'll take that first, and that is about the recent FDA ruling. The questions are coming from a couple of different aspects, but just maybe generally, if someone from the panel wants to provide their view on the recent FDA ruling on regulating laboratory-developed tests.
Sure, I can sort of summarize it for the full audience, what's happening, and begin to talk about what the effect might be. The Food and Drug Administration has for a long time been enforcing a policy of enforcement discretion for laboratory developed tests as opposed to in vitro diagnostics that are developed by a lab and then are distributed for all labs to use. Laboratory developed tests are used only in the laboratory that developed them. There's a different regulatory framework for both types of diagnostics. This has a major implication for precision medicine because the questions that are unanswered are the quality of the tests, the questions that are asked about LDTs as opposed to IVDs that are not regulated by the FDA through the same pathway as IVDs, are they of the same quality? Do they do what they say they're going to do? And the second issue is access to these tests. So an LDT is able to be developed much quicker, and patients will have access to that testing much quicker than they have to go through FDA. It's also much less expensive, takes less resources to move forward with an LDT. There have been issues around some LDTs not being of high enough quality to do exactly what they are meant to do, and they don't bring the value of testing. They don't have the quality of testing results that you would assume are part of a regulatory framework. Now, by issuing this rule this week, or I guess maybe it was Monday, I think, when they issued the final rule, the FDA said that they are going to no longer utilize this policy of enforcement discretion for laboratory developed tests, and they're going to phase in a regulatory framework that's more like IVDs to balance that playing field over the next 4 years. Now, there are other rules to this. Some of those tests some existing tests will be exempt. They're really focused on the high complexity tests that are part of this precision oncology pathway, which we're talking about. Now, by doing that, by making those tests go through a more robust regulatory framework, we really do risk both access to quick diagnostic testing when innovation moves forward, and we risk an innovation lapse around the development of new tests if these in fact are going to be associated with higher costs in a larger FDA pathway. So the question becomes one of access and quality. This will have a large implication on precision medicine, as some tests may not be available in the future, but it also may ensure a quality situation. So there are many folks that are against this rule, and there are some folks that are for this rule, so that that the testing can be more robustly regulated. The Personalized Medicine Coalition, because we have members of both different groups, is unable to take a position on this. But we do think that the appropriate solution is probably not the FDA issuing a rule that they devised without adequate community input, and a legislative answer is probably more in need for this issue, so we can make sure that the entire community weighs in on how to move forward.
Of course, we in Europe have had to deal with this for the last 5 years because of the in vitro diagnostic regulation. So I would very much agree with you. This is a big challenge. This is a big challenge in relation to cost. It's a big challenge in relation to availability. It's a big challenge as well in the nuance of the in vitro diagnostic regulation in terms of having particular notifiable bodies that are able to then judge whether this is a proper test or not. So there are a lot of issues here. Diaceutics have very much taken a lead on this, and there are a number of papers that have come out from Diaceutics, particularly in collaboration with the different laboratories around Europe. So this is something that really we need to address head on. And I think partnership maybe across the ocean is a way of doing this, because obviously it's going to be the challenge that we've faced for the last 5 years. You're now facing from last Monday.
Dr. Chandra, maybe from a practical... Oh, sorry, I forgot that. Dr. Chandra, maybe from a practical lab perspective, do you have views on how do you foresee this will impact your daily operations?
Yeah, I have a number of views, so I'm going to try to remain as objective as possible. And the idea is to, and I think everyone will agree that we all want high quality, innovative testing. We actually have an assay, precision diagnostics assay, which is one of less than 5 in the country here, that has undergone the FDA review process. And let me tell you, it was not an easy task. It was very, very difficult and very challenging to be able to do that. And I don't think all laboratories are going to be able to do that. In fact, as Daryl was alluding to earlier, there will be a consolidation of tests as well as testing, which is unfortunate because although we do have such an assay, and there are advantages to having the FDA behind the test you're providing for patients, there are also limitations. For example, if there is a new biomarker and that has been identified as a result of a publication and it's not on the panel, well, it's going to take 2 to 3 years potentially to upgrade or develop a new panel, and it will be costly to be able to deliver a panel that keeps up with the pace of innovation. So there are advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, as you all know, the laboratory community would prefer a legislative approach to this. But again, we got to take a step back. We got to focus on patient access. We got to focus on quality. And there are some very high quality LDTs that are out there as well. As far as what does this mean practically for the practice of laboratory medicine, there will be restricted patient access because the cost to bring a test to FDA approval is on the order of millions of dollars for each assay. So that will lead to consolidation and unfortunately a lack of patient access. But hopefully through dialogue, we can bring this topic to a point that's a win-win for all of the stakeholders involved.
I mean, my other worry is, as well as the worries that I voiced there a couple of minutes ago, is that we're actually going to potentially stifle innovation rather than drive innovation. And I mean, I think that's not what we want. We want to be looking at ways in which we can develop new ways of testing, more efficient ways of testing, cheaper ways of testing. This is not going to allow us to do that in its current format.
There's a couple of questions more related to the testing aspect of limiting access to precision oncology. One is thinking about NGS panels and specifically oversized NGS-based testing, whether they're fit for purpose to effectively implement precision oncology, or whether newer technologies like multiplex PCR-based approach is better suited to effectively implement testing.
I'll take this one. I've given a lot of thought to this throughout my career, and I think that when a manufacturer brings a test to market that has more than the established and the emerging, there is that tension, right, between the manufacturer and the health plan around the value or lack of value of the extra. And I think that there is a recognition that the space is moving very quickly, and so it's hard to say that 10 genes that don't have proven utility today won't have proven utility tomorrow, and that's the nature of genetics and genomics. So I think that I've lost my train of thought, but I think that there needs to be a flexible system whereby there are some sort of designations. I love to categorize things around what's established, what's emerging, what's plausible as useful because maybe it's in a pathway but doesn't yet have utility. And there needs to be sort of a focus on how do we define the utility or at least lack of harm for that last mile, those genes that maybe don't have a use today, And that's an area where I think collaboration between payers and manufacturers can really reveal some ahas. And there is value in having that dialogue. It doesn't mean that health plan is going to then go ahead and cover the broader assay, but I think just getting past that and admitting there are some that are established, there are some that are emerging, and the rest are plausible but not yet known.
And I think from my perspective, it's not a one size fits all. I don't think, we should always use large comprehensive panels or we should always use PCR. I think it depends on the context of use. And it may vary. So if you're a KOL or a researcher, getting additional information to understand the mutations that evolve over time, maybe doing that multiple times during the treatment journey, for example, at the time of relapse, may afford substantial value. There were also I've heard from, physicians as well, that having those large comprehensive panels and seeing these mutations that you can't take action upon may cause stress for them and for their patients, not knowing what it means, right? So I think it's a real balancing act, at least from my perspective. And I always try to tell people, even when it comes to precision medicine, never think it's a one-size-fits-all solution. You really have to look at the situation. What are you trying to achieve? What's most important? And use the right tool for that situation.
Let me just point out the perfect timing of this question too, right after the LDT question, and this really exemplifies the complexity of what we're trying to deal with here. So going back to Dawn's MRI example, well, an MRI would be needed for everyone who needs to get a hip replacement. The example I used in contrast was a 2% prevalent test. However, if you had a test that had all of the genes related to lung cancer, that would affect probably 70% of patients. So you want to have access to that test, but that's one case, as Sarah talked about. So, and then if you think about a PCR example, multi-PCR example, you have to deal with what kind of sample you're getting, biospecimen you're getting. This all gets more complicated with the LDT proposed rule issue, because now if you want to move a test that advances with the technology as the technology advances, and you need to get a regulatory approval for every new indication on that test, it's going to slow that down. So all of this is related.
Very good. And
let me give another anecdotal example, because we're testing so many patients on a daily basis that I think it's important for us to really share the practical perspectives here. We had a patient who had apparently a lung cancer, and we performed testing with our broad panel, and we found a mutation in a gene called BAP1. And while it wasn't pathognomonic, it started a chain of events that questioned whether this patient actually had lung cancer. And had we only had the lung cancer genes on the panel, we wouldn't have made this discovery. Long story short, after investigation, this patient and additional tests, this patient had a mesothelioma that was masquerading as a lung cancer. So I always like to bring it back to the patient and just give real life examples. These are the benefits of broad profiling and comprehensive testing. And we're our division is writing a paper on that as we speak.
Can I just add a very quick thing, quick comment? It's and I think it's everything that we heard today. It also depends where is the testing and where's the patient going, because one thing is that community setting versus an academic institution. So I think that's kind of the balance that we also needed to add to this equation. I agree, it's not one size fits all, but if you're trying to get access and equity, it's not one size fits all in terms of large panels in a more remote area, or an area that just the complexity of interpreting the panel is just not needed for that particular patient. So I think that geography is another thing that we need to put it into play.
And one more comment: testing is not a one-time scenario in cancer; it's multiple times. So, I think that's the most important thing, right? I think even insurance companies have to have these sort of almost panel-based approaches, meaning options, right? So that's another biggest sort of unaddressed areas wherein you're coming back again and again. Lung is a very good example, and I think there is enough real-world data to take from that, wherein when do you want to bring in a CGP versus a single plex for a multiplex?
Mark, quick comment.
Yeah, we looked at this a number of years ago in a series of papers that we wrote in the Lancet, where we were looking at this in laboratory medicine, but specifically in low and middle income countries. And one of the things you need to do is adapt to what's the opportunity, but also what's the practicality. And it's finding that balance again. And one of the things we were looking at was near patient testing, potentially leapfrogging technologies that actually bring you very quickly up to sort of more modern approaches. So need to think about that in the LMICs.
So just a last quick question, and there are more questions, and as promised, we will follow up and answer those. So just really quickly before we hand over to the fireside chat, there was a question coming in which I find interesting on, we've discussed the need for potentially changing the reimbursement setup for the testing aspect, and that will need more evidence generation, especially on the value-based aspect. The question is, who should fund that? Do we think that the diagnostic companies have the ability and financial strength to lift that burden, or who should cover such cost?
Good question.
I think it's a challenging question for sure. I don't think it can be any one group or organization, to be totally honest. And I think when I came from diagnostics prior to entering pharma, I think diagnostics, as we talked about earlier, are already so highly commoditized. They're having enough trouble just being able to bring those diagnostics to bear and into the market. And on the counter side to what was talked about the proposed rule, and I'm not going to comment if I agree or disagree or any of that, because I think it's such a highly contentious point. But I think one of the challenges is that the diagnostic companies are quite frankly held to a much higher bar than the laboratory developed tests. So I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying we should probably think about what is the right level to ensure patients get accurate and reliable results. So I don't think the diagnostics can foot that bill, given the current climate that they're in, but I'm not sure necessarily pharma, academics. I think we'll have to sort through what makes the most amount of sense is my general take.
Take some of the tax on tobacco and put it into diagnostic testing.
I like it. That's a good one.
I like it.
So,
Go ahead. Who's going to go next, Susanne?
You go next, Cecilia.
Okay. So since we just heard the word pharma, so that's the other thing. I do agree that it's not sustainable for a system to have just one single stakeholder. So I do agree that the diagnostic companies, manufacturers may not be able to do it. I completely agree with that. I think we discussed value-based, but I think the bigger question is, it's a multi-stakeholder effort to understand what is the value and how are we going to address that. Is it by evidence? Is it by the value-based models? So we can discuss that in multiple ways, but I think the point here is not sustainable to have simply one stakeholder taking charge of it. Just because it's just not going to last. And primarily if it becomes also a lab, a diagnostic manufacturer, a pharma company, it's very different than a government, or I'm going to go back and also put it back to the payer. Like, so what is the evidence that we're all looking for that makes sense for the healthcare system as a whole to actually incorporate testing as part of the patient treatment?
I personally think no one better than ASCO can pull this. And also my earlier comment on public-private partnerships about open databases. I think we have pulled enough in this country, especially in the United States, with the cancer moonshot. We would have at least expected, at least with one indication, to have an insight of what has been the impact of precision medicine on value-based reimbursement. Is it to the test or treatment? I think it's high time.
Final quick question, Daryl. Oh, not question. Final quick comment.
So Cecilia got to it a little bit, but one thing that has been proposed for funding is obviously, I agree with Sarah, that the diagnostic industry really will have trouble footing the bill. They have low margins on their tests, and many of them are in financial squeeze already. But one thing that has been proposed, and I'm not saying an advocate for this, is to do pragmatic real-world trials instead of clinical trials to move forward the idea. So this would allow access to a pilot group of patients to a diagnostic test, and then that data, even though it hasn't been fully regulated and approved through a clinical trial, but then the data from that would be assessed from a real-world standpoint and could be used as long as the real-world pragmatic trial was designed right. We could determine whether or not the value is there. So it's one thing. There are caveats to that, but there's one thing that has been proposed.
Thank you to the panel again. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for the questions coming in. We will make sure to follow up on the questions offline, so everyone will get an answer.
Thank you to our chair, who chaired us magnificently. Well done, Susanne.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to hand over to Peter, our founder of Diaceutics and a thought leader in precision medicine.
Thank you, Susanne. Could I ask my two co-fireside chatters to join me? And
Sit in the middle.
no, I didn't sit in the middle. I just add my thanks to all of the, not just the panel discussion today, but the forum members who gave up literally hours of their time to come and have this discussion and this debate. I want to move our conversation on just a little bit, and I'm going to take a more optimistic line, if I can, with my two fellow cohorts here. And I'm joined really on stage by two people whom I hope they don't mind me calling them this, but two veterans of precision medicine. And I mean that in the sense that they have been round the houses and looked in every cupboard and what's good, what's bad. And I think between them, they have the ability to both zoom in to what's going on at a regional and a zip code level in precision medicine, as well as zoom out and look at what's going on in terms of the industry in general. If I can first introduce Howard McLeod. Howard, if I may, will be known to many across the audience as both an innovator in the front line of precision medicine and an advocate for tomorrow's precision medicine business models. Howard has a day job as the Centre Director at the Precision Medicine and Functional Genomics UT University in St George, but he's also a PMC board member and in his spare time is an advisor to Intermountain Health, which is serving over 4 million patients, and he has explained to me the multiple systems that are there. Hopefully that will come out in the conversation there. And in between all that time, he's had time to author over 600 papers on precision medicine. I think you'll agree that he knows his stuff. But it's also my great pleasure to invite Kristen onto the stage. Kristen and I have had a 15-year ongoing discussion on precision medicine. But in all of that time, Kristen has impressed me as remaining absolutely faithful to her vision, so much so that she wrote a book on it, which was called Personalising Precision Medicine. And I was able to look at the reviewers of this. One review comment, they were all positive, but one review comment, this is one of the first works to succinctly address the often opaque, rapidly evolving market supporting precision medicine. A terrific accomplishment and a must-have for anyone entering the healthcare industry. Kristen has over 30 years' experience in strategy and consulting, has advised many of the best in the industry and really helped them think forward in the industry. So welcome to you both, and welcome to sunny Belfast, and it's not often I can say that. I'm going to dive right in, if I may, really and pick up this topic that I think was discussed, which is about the interface of precision medicine and value-based care. There was a lot of, I think in the past hour and a half, but also through the forum discussion, there was a lot of debate around how the economics can work, how will they work, reimbursement. But in many ways, the really big topic was about the intersection of precision medicine and value-based care. And Howard, you have really had significant experience in this. I'm going to ask you, can you help guide our thinking here on this topic? You know, in your opinion, where do precision medicine and value-based care synergize?
So in value-based care, I would argue that the various UK health systems are an example of value-based care. There is a amount of money per person that is given to a health authority, and they try to deploy it in a way that they can get the most out of it. And that's certainly versions of that are in the United States and in Canada and every country you think about. And what we've seen there is that the value-based care institutions are the ones that are focusing on that. They are the ones that are if they spend $1 on one thing, they lose $1 to spend on something else. And so the value piece of it is very important in that. And so when you look at something like precision medicine, yes, they want to attain their quality measures. They want the best care possible for the patients. But precision medicine becomes, at its rudimentary, a way of shepherding or stewarding the use of incredibly expensive therapies. So if you're going to spend $1,000 on a test that allows you to make wise decisions about a $10,000 to $20,000 a month medicine, suddenly that is a very different thing than can we cure grandma, which might be my lens or some of the other lenses that are out there. And so with value-based care, a lot of it really comes down to can we hit quality measures better? Can we get more for our spend as going forward? And precision medicine, we've often focused on the extremes. I remember early on with EGFR inhibitors, we would call things Lazarus syndrome, when there'd be a patient that was in hospice and suddenly was back to work, or but if they were wiser, back to a cruise or something more enjoyable than work. But the idea of that still exists, and there certainly are people that we can now say the word cure with a straight face in some context now for solid tumors. But there's still a lot of emphasis around how do we make this equitable across our patient populations, and how do we really focus this down? And that comes down to better stewardship.
Yeah, and if I could stay with you for a minute and just follow up on that, your clarity of thought on this topic has always impressed me, and you've spent a lot of time really looking at this intersection, precision medicine and value-based care at Intermountain Health. Could you share any sort of practical observations you've had around the economics of this, in terms of how that has rolled out across what is a very diverse healthcare system at Intermountain?
So health systems like Intermountain are not one thing. That particular example is 33 hospitals, 400 clinics in parts of 9 U.S. states. So there are areas that are 100% value-based care. There are areas that are 100% fee-for-service type of, you do something, you get paid for it. You do nothing, you don't get paid type of area. And then there's some things in between. And so part of the challenge in a system like the United States, and I would argue that it has a more similarity than not in the United Kingdom, because at the health authority level, in Aberdeenshire, we had to make choices that were different from Inverness-shire, showing you that I was based in Aberdeen in Scotland for a while. And those decisions were made at a very local level. And so the same thing is happening within states, within practices, whatever drill down you want. And so because of that, if you're looking at a health system, how does it work in Aberdeen and in Inverness? How is it going to be useful in those different contexts? In Aberdeen, at the time at least, we had a lot more clinical trials going on. So something like sequencing would have been more important for identified patients to go on to trials, because with good Scottish blood, if you put a patient on a trial, you're not paying for a lot of the aspects of their care. Someone else is, so it's good there. Not as many trials at that time over in Inverness, and so it would be more choosing which therapy, not so much around the trial aspect. So even the same platform has very different needs or uses in the different sites. And certainly the case within a complex environment like the United States, where there really isn't a health system. There's just a series of different approaches. And a patient that comes in with Medicare could have several dozen types of Medicare, everything from Medicare Advantage, which has a very high deductible, all the way through to double coverage, which is more like having Bupa or something like that in the United Kingdom, and their needs are quite different in that aspect. So really what it comes down to is, precision medicine, while it's individualizing what a patient needs, it also has to be thought about from a process standpoint. What does thread across all these different environments? And that's where it will be broadly useful. The extremes, like only for clinical trials, will be paramount at one place and useless at everywhere else.
Thanks, Howard.
And I would also say the environment continues to change, right? And so when we think about our patient populations, one of the things we look at is patient populations that still don't end up, even with all the consolidation of health systems and having different tiers, we don't see African American populations come in for those clinical trials, and they are not served within some of the drugs that we're looking at today. And so if you look at a company like Indigenous AI that's using AI to build patient populations that is specific to the African American population, specific to our most needy populations worldwide, it adds an even more of a complex layer that we need to think about, less about the complexity in the way that we just described it, and more about the complexity across the whole population.
And in a situation like the state of Utah, where I currently reside, we have situations where patients have to drive 10 minutes to see their oncologist, and others where it's a 6-hour drive to the nearest commercial airport to then fly and get care. And so the different ways of delivering precision medicine is there. In that case, there's a lot of tele-oncology happening, where the biopsy might be performed by a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant who's at the site, and it'll then be shipped to a pathologist who will do the work. It'll be sequenced, and then a medical oncologist will do an online visit, review the scans, review the molecular, and then go forward, where the nurse practitioner then delivers the care at that local community center that is, thousands of miles from a academic site. And that's caused people who said, what, my cattle need tending, I cannot leave the ranch, to say, all right, I can, because I have to go and live in Salt Lake City or wherever it might be, to say, all right, I can get care now. I'll get care. I might live longer. I might be cured. But before it was like, well, my responsibilities are such, I can't even bother with precision medicine. And so it's along the continuum that needs to be covered.
I said we would zoom in and zoom out, so I'm going to zoom out, Kristen, put you on the spot. I think it's fair to say that we're witnessing kind of an unprecedented crisis in the cost of healthcare across the globe. Okay, yes. It's universal. It manifests itself in different ways in different areas, but can you foresee a situation where precision medicine is part of the solution here? Can you see that happening, Kristen? And do you think that's a debate that's happening at the minute, or do you think it's something that we need to encourage?
It's not even a debate, it's a reality. Because when you look at the pharmaceutical industry, we have a $50 billion patent cliff that we're heading towards. We have portfolios that are not right-sized. We have pharmaceutical companies that are trying to understand where they fit into the market and what their new case of being is going to be and how they're going to best serve patients. And we have a situation where those companies and the entire ecosystem around not only has to continue to innovate, but also has to control costs. Precision medicine can do all of that. When you really look at it, it is that precise medicine for the right place and for the right time. And it allows us to not only be able to treat the right patients, but to control the entire costs along the way, if it's done right. Now, depending on where you are in the world, you can easily do that with a one health system approach and really control it. Or you can be like in the United States, where it really just depends on which system you're going through. And what we're trying to debate now, I think the big debate is how to best use consortia, how to best use diagnostics companies paired with pharmaceutical companies, how to use our data companies to the best way possible to take this ecosystem and get it to a better, more cost-contained way.
You have a lot of access to the C-suite across the industry in various different... Is this a debate and discussion that's going on there, this idea of both collaboration, role of precision medicine? Obviously, we're relevant.
Yes, so it is a constant debate and a questioning. It's an education because many in the C-suite have some understanding and not others. You know, if you think of our last panel, the people on that panel and the people in the panel virtually, like a Cecilia or Sarah, absolutely understand the space, can explain it to the C-suite, and can understand that value. There are plenty of others that do not have the data, like what Diaceutics provides, like what KPMG provides, that do not understand where these drugs can fit in and how they can fit against the blockbusters of the 20 years of the past, and haven't quite gotten there yet. And so what we try to do is really look at it from a perspective of showing them that data. Look at that patient leakage across, a lung cancer journey or a prostate cancer journey, where you start with a certain amount of patients and you see them drop out because of the lack of access, because of the lack of payment, because of whatever it happens to be, and you see what happens at the end. By looking at all of this pieces of the ecosystem and working through them together, you're able to get them to a place where they not only sign on to it, but they'll pay the high valuations to get those drugs into those portfolios and targets into their portfolio.
We're seeing some efforts of cooperation, if not collaboration, because of some practicalities. So if you have the only drug that hits a particular target that is in 2% of a solid tumor population or a specific solid tumor population, you are trying to get people just to do the testing to find those patients. Well, your competitor, your frenemy, also has the same problem with a different target. And so we're seeing a lot more efforts where even at the medical science liaison level, where they'll partner up just to try to get a practice to do testing at all, realizing they'll win 2% of the time. Their competitors might win 2% of the time or some other number, but at least they'll find those patients that need it. And the whole shift from my drug's the best drug to please find the patient who needs my drug is something that over the last few years has really been apparent.
Yeah, okay. And look, I'm going to unashamedly put the both of you on the spot. Take out your crystal balls here, okay? Have a look into them. I want you to take us forward 5 years. I think one of the polls we saw was, how quickly can we implement the level of change? I think 5 years was, I think people saying, this is tough, there's a lot of ground to cover. So take us to the end of that 5 years, Howard, and give us what's your vision? What would you like to see happen here? Obviously with a particular regard to the patient and precision medicine.
So I think precision medicine is going to be a cumulative complexity issue. When 20 years ago or 18 years ago, when we started doing EGFR testing for gefitinib and Irissa, back, you remember the day, that was a novelty just to test it all. Now it's a point where every day or every week or every month, there's something new that is added to that stack. And so I think we're getting to the point where a number of centers are having, they call them different things, but functionally they're having a radiologist for the therapeutic genome that is present for their system. And I'm old enough to remember when PET scan first came out, no one would order one because at that time only nuclear medicine physicians could read them, and nobody knew a nuclear medicine physician. Once they became read by radiologists, once they realized that you could order one and the radiologist would read it, and you just have to read the impression section that came back, suddenly they became maybe even overused. And I think in precision medicine, we're starting to see that needs to be part of it. There needs to be a availability of expertise to the level, not this gene equals this drug, because you can Google that, but amongst these three options, which one should be first, second, and third? And it's the medical decision complexity that is holding things up more than the pathology complexity. And so I think that's where a growth area is going to happen. It'll be called different things at different places, but the idea that you in a fast-moving clinic can get some quick advice saying, for this patient, therapy B, followed by clinical trial 2, then therapy C. Don't use therapy A because the patient's platelets are low. That, in the moment that I just told you that, which was, 10 seconds, you can then go and see the patient. And that's the level that most frontline clinicians need. They can Google the history of TP53 when they get home at night. But in clinic, they just need to know what to do, and they need it fast.
What's the next best step? Yeah. Kristen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, my barometer is a little bit different, obviously, because of the the business implications in the deal market. So the way I look at this is what's happening in the deal market, who's interested, who's not. And so when I look out 5 years, am I seeing something now that would allow me to think that precision medicine will really get there in the same way? And I'm 100% seeing it. When you look at 2023 in a down deal market, the majority of the biggest biopharma deals had a precision medicine component. Period, full stop. Then when you look at this year, as we continue to go through a bit of a bumpy deal market, each one of those, take the device out of it, but when you look at diagnostics, when you look at pharmaceuticals, it's all that precision medicine component. When you really look at where we're going to be in the future of medicine, it is powered by precision medicine, and not only from a perspective of pharma. The drugs are one thing. It's the diagnostics, it's the services, it's all the wraparounds that we talk about to really usher a patient or a tissue sample or a blood sample through an entire journey. And what we're seeing as the private equity market starts to explode and bring up again, we're seeing them interested in precision medicine-based AI. They're seeing data components of this. They're seeing the diagnostics and they're seeing the therapeutics. And so we use that as a true barometer to understand what's going to happen in the next couple of years. And when we see all of those deals starting to happen and starting to flourish, paired with the right sizing of the portfolios internally and the really nice organizational components of each of our pharma companies having precision medicine management teams and bringing the other veterans that are all in this room and on the phone, other veterans in the space to power those companies is the true harbinger of what was going to happen.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that sort of inspired the discussions that we've been having over the last 12 months actually was a comment that was made to Susanne when she was sitting in front of, I think it was either a pharmaceutical customer or perhaps it was a forum, and was presenting the clinical practice gaps, that shocking data that shows how far we have to travel. Yeah. And someone said, and what are you going to do about it? And, we had sort of a moment of reflection at Diaceutics and thinking, by elucidating the issue, is that not enough? But of course it's not enough. And I think part of what we've seen over the past year is that the value of collaboration, the value of bringing that multi-stakeholder group into the room, you must presumably, with that, I think, very optimistic view of precision medicine in the future, I think see the importance both at the collaboration at a regional and a local level, as well as at
and part of it is the good to great to perfect scenario. I'm always frustrated by the lack of perfection. But maybe that's for the next life and not this one. Maybe we should be happy with being good and maybe even great. And if we look at it from that standpoint, we've made huge progress. In each 6-month period brings progress. Certainly at the community setting, at the academic setting, at the pharma setting, all the way across. Even at the regulatory setting, this process they're starting to get a little bit more nuance of understanding at CDRH with the FDA, at EMA, at other bodies like that. And so I am optimistic, partly because if we're smarter today than we were yesterday, then that's a good thing. And that we are achieving. It's just that it's so frustrating we're not perfect.
Yeah, and I would say the go it alone strategy doesn't work, right? I mean, and as we've had our discussions over the years and as we've looked at this, the collaboration and the education of all of us doing this together is what propels us forward. So when you think about the KPMG Diaceutics Alliance, where we're really taking data and putting it in the hands of that C-suite, the best data in the world and the most proprietary data in the world, all going to those C-suites, and being able to have a company be able to look at that and understand where the biomarkers are going from a laboratorian's perspective, from an oncologist perspective. They don't have that. They didn't have that data. Now they have it full, in pushing forward. And when we think about the ways we're all working in the industry, like the documentary that we're going to launch next week, really looking at the whole ecosystem and allowing each part of the ecosystem to talk to each other and to be educated together, that's what's propelling everybody forward.
She writes books, she does documentaries. I mean...
Listen, when you're a veteran, you just need to keep at it, roll your sleeves up. I'd like to thank my two panel, not just for being here today, but for just being so on it and pushing forward. I think our future is safe in your hands. Thank you both very much indeed. Denny, would you like to come up and wrap us up for the day? Thank you very much indeed. Yeah.
job. So if you're not excited with that fireside chat, how can you not be excited? And I just want to briefly do something that I didn't do at the beginning, which is introduce myself. I got involved in healthcare 40 years ago, looking at the patient waiting for care. I started at the Mayo Clinic. I moved into pharmaceutical R&D 25 years ago. I'm still thinking the patient is waiting, but we can solve that problem together. And so where do we go from here? Everything you've heard today, what are we going to do with this information? Daryl told us earlier that we have a draft white paper. We're going to take the feedback we got from you today, your questions, the participation in the polling. We're going to update the white paper. We are going to develop a roadmap. We are going to come up with some suggested implementation scenarios, and we're going to leave the DXRX platform open for you to take a look at the information that we put in there for 90 days. And then it's going to be up to all of us to take this and move it forward. Change is hard. Somebody mentioned earlier we should have a change management strategy. I think those of you that have worked on change management know that involves understanding your local stakeholders. Howard gave us a great example with Intermountain Healthcare, how they work differently in the 9 different states that they provide services. So each of you within your own geographies, within your own healthcare communities, need to come up with your own implementation scenarios, but together we can actually make a difference. So it's been a great privilege for me as well to participate in the last year on this. And I want to thank Diaceutics for giving me a chance to co-chair this. I look forward to how we take this and move it forward collectively, and thank you for your time today.